12 miles below. By Mark Arrows. Chapter 71 to 80. Book 2, Chapter 24, A Taste of Blood, T. Taratha's wings carefully tasted the air, individual blades moving to catch the invisible currents. Her inbuilt gravity manipulator did most of the work, of course, the wings were more for decoration. Still, they played their part as if it were the most important piece. And so, she approached the human settlement from above. Humans, as she had learned, had a blind spot. They never looked up. Not unless they'd been trained and conditioned to look up for dangers, such as when they spotted signs of her old nest. Only then would they look up. Day-to-day life, however? Not a single care in the world. Far below her, these humans moved around like ants. They scuttled about the hunting lodge, as Tamery had called it. She could make a guess if she cared to, though she left it instead to her subsystems. Recognition software running on the old human CMO's systems powered to life, crunched the data, put green squares on anything that had a high enough percentage match to a human figure. And then tallied up all the squares. At the start, dozens would be added to the tally as they appeared in and out of tents, exposing themselves to her sight. A few hours into her watch, her software had more or less caught every single human, no duplicates. The count came to a halt at 133 humans. It hadn't gone up for the past hour since. Packing up fuel cells on hover sleds, cooking meals for their own, storing armor and weapons in the armory for inspection and cleaning. About 50 relic knights loitered around, some keeping watch over the short metal walls, others milling about a campfire. A handful had spent some time training drills in their courtyard. Telling jokes to one another, laughing all the while. The last caravan had settled into place, the crew going to sleep while the Overwatch team made sure all the supplies were accounted for and tied down. Their encampment wasn't a permanent thing. It had been constructed to last semi-permanently. No one knew when the mites would decide to visit and tinker with the world, though when they did there was no stopping them. Neither machine nor humans had any chance to stop the pests when they set their mind on something. Mites wouldn't fight back. They'd simply keep coming like the tide, washing away brick, stone, and anything too slow to get out of the way. Small bites taken out of everything. Organic material would be zapped a few times at first, almost like a warning to get out of their territory. Animals certainly heeded the message. Machines didn't bother letting mites climb on top in the first place. Her own nest had migrated a few times the moment they spotted any column of glowing lights slowly marching in their direction. Such was the way of the world. As a spider, she'd never thought twice about it. Nor did she care much for what the mites left behind in their trail. Now, however, she could appreciate it. This particular location was among a wide metal plain, broken apart by geometrically cut rocks jutting out from the metal flooring. Whiskers of silver flickered out of the ground, swaying in the wind. A mite-made construction that imitated plants as far as Tarath could see. An invisible current passed through these whiskers, where occasionally those silver lights would shift into bright rainbow colors, all in synchronized movement. Like a wave of color passing over the plain before the glow all returned to silver. From the ground, it likely didn't look like much. But from above, she could see the whole picture. The mites had made a painting. A jumbled mix of colors that made little sense, more of a fever dream than anything artistic. Tarath felt there was a pattern to it, if she spent long enough searching for it. Her subroutines had taken the data, crunched it, and returned no results. Which was interesting, since that same subroutine module had been able to track every single human in camp right down to the way they walked around, all within a few hours of surveillance. And yet, with all that calculating power, it had no idea what the mites were attempting to make. But Tarath felt she could almost understand what the mites had made. Less something cold and hard about data, more something of a feeling to be elicited. Across these rolling hills, the rocks occasionally turned into something more majestic. Like massive statues that towered far above any, all tilted to some side, half buried. But only the impressions. Stare at any with a closer look and they simply appeared to be rock pillars that happened to tilt over. At the right angle, they looked almost like weeping robed humans. Faces frozen in time, distorted by the rocks. And only because the pale artificial moonlight gave everything deep shadows. There was no other light besides this silver twilight. The mites hadn't made any other light sources besides the imitation moon she remained close to. The humans weren't here for the art. They had come because this plane was in a strategic location. And had generally an easy sight out all around, at the top of that hill. They'd created short metal walls that surrounded them like a fortress, with multiple tents and buildings set up closer to the center. Tamery had explained that knights would rest here, before setting out to hunt machines for power cells. It also made for a good trading post, and a general store for anyone intrepid enough to live in the open territory. There was no safety outside the Undersider city walls, but this was a close second. Turrets appeared across those walls, she counted 23. Most were empty. The humans hadn't encountered true threats for months. And if they did, they'd spot it miles away, pack up, and leave before the wave of machines crashed by. Runners didn't care to break down buildings or loot trinkets, so when the threat had passed by, the humans would return and find all their items left alone. That would change tonight. Silently, she fed the data back to her army, giving instructions on what targets to take out first. The full layout of their scattered army was clear in her mind. The feather then descended down, gliding silently to land before the small fort, right on the path to their simple gate. There, she stayed, waiting for the humans to notice. You think they'll simply surrender? Give up on their duties and vows? Tennycent asked, by her side. The wraith remained translucent, arms crossed. Yes. She said. I predict there is a high chance the majority will surrender once they understand the option exists. He grunted. Humans are not so weak. We're more resilient than you expect. She hummed at that. Perhaps you were. I've seen your memories. And I've come to understand humans are different from one group to another, even if they all wear the same form. Convinced of yourself? He tugged. Never a good sign. Pride comes before the fall. Do you know what I did to prepare for this moment? Tarath asked. When he didn't answer, she continued. I learned. I know their language. Their traditions. The geography of their lands. Which outpost to tame. And which to burn. I know them more than they know me. And I know myself more than they know themselves. Self-delusion. He shrugged. All you've learned, it's been from books or rats. They will fight, and they will never surrender. I hope it comes at a steep cost. These are not warriors. She countered, waving a hand to the wall ahead. They dress like them, act like them, believe themselves to be even. But they come here to hunt small packs of machines for power cells. They avoid larger packs, or true danger. They don't travel with traders or take escort jobs. You don't know these people, Tennycent. You've never had to know them. They're no soldiers. They're simple hunters. And when faced with the threat of death, they will fold. Maybe when your face is pressed up against the metal earth and ground up to scrap under a boot, then you'll understand humans further. And I'll thank the gods I will be there to watch you crushed and broken. Charming. She said. How do you handle disappointment? He remained silent at that. Glaring at the fortress ahead. It didn't take them very long to notice her. The wings she kept outstretched made her stand out from the distance, while the rest of her body would surely trigger alarms the moment they paid more attention. The white halo of metal, floating lazily at an angle above her, was just as noticeable from a distance. She saw them begin to panic, running around the camp, many taking a quick look over the wall to stare at her, before disappearing back down. The turrets powered up. The camp grew lively with shouts. She remained waiting. The turrets were easily in range of her. Not that those would be any danger to her, of course. Still, they remained pointed directly at her. Warning sirens within her mind flashed bright, alerting her weapons were locked onto her form. It took them another 10 minutes before the small gates opened, and a group of 10 knights walked out. One held onto a hastily cobbled white flag, stepping carefully across the path to meet her. The rest remained solemn, keeping a sharp lookout around them. Hands on the hilts of their blades. Truce. Truce. The one with a white flag said as he got closer, stepping out of the group, nervous. I've been sent to find out what you want. As expected so far, she closed her wings, and drew them closer to her hips. Inside, her countermeasure systems flared to life, easily breaking through the simple encryption these knights were using. This far out, they had been lax with their protocols. I am Tarath, a feather in service to the Violet Lady, charged to take or destroy your city. I was not given further directions on how to accomplish my goal, so it is within my ability to allow for mercy. She said. Her voice carried to the messenger, and far further past him. Every knight within the settlement could hear her. Every speaker or radio within was broadcasting her discussion. As for the messenger, he gulped, glanced behind himself for reassurance, then looked around. The plains were empty. There was no army in sight. No attack, save for herself. He slowly turned back to look at her, growing slightly more confident. That's not going to happen. I don't speak for the commander, but he's not going to accept this. The other 9 behind him shuffled around, as if unsure what to do next. Some glanced at one another, looking for direction. Tarath tilted her head. I have not come to debate. I have come to take. I will start with this hunting lodge. Throw down your weapons, kneel, and your life will be spared. I give this offer freely to all who hear this message, to be used at any moment within the next 3 hours. Any who choose to surrender will be allowed to leave once stripped of equipment. You will return to your city. I give my word of this. All machines in this region obey me. They will not attack nor bar your path home. The feather drew out her weapons. A long sword in her right, inscribed with the fractal of division, the common version. It hummed in the dim artificial moonlight, vibrating softly, whispering destruction. She'd had this one made just for her, while her left hand withdrew a knife with the same power. The soul fractal that housed her artificial soul deep within her flared further into life, reaching out for the captive soul besides her. The fractal of unity flared to life, and she used it to unite Tennycent's skills with her own. Tennycent grimaced at her side, trying to claw her grip away. He held for a moment, then vanished away, drawn back inside her. Should any take up my offer in bad faith, to pretend their surrender, they will be marked for death. This too, I give my word. The emissary took a few steps back, dropping his flag, hand reaching out to his own blade as a reflex. Wait. Is this some kind of joke? Machines don't just negotiate, what's going on? The sound of a blade being drawn triggered the rest of the knights to draw out their own. They all took different stances, keeping their eyes on her. Behind the group, far back at the fortress, sounds of chaos suddenly rang out. And then the screaming began. Claws filled with occult blue ripped through the metal ground, opening up carefully dug tunnels. Runners sprinted out of the ground, scaling the walls with alacrity. A few knights had the good reflex to open fire. Most were too tied up with the same event happening within their very midst. The first targets had been the turrets. The runners rushed, ripping the weapons apart or throwing the operators out. Some had been quick enough to start opening fire, but alone they had no chance of surviving for long. Howls and screams began to ring out from the fortress as more and more machines overran the camp from the inside out. Surrender. Or die. Tarath said. She meant it too. The 10 knights circled around her, each unwilling to be the first one to strike. Each unwilling to be the first one to surrender either. Come on you fucks. One of them sneered. She's alone. There's 10 of us. Let's just rush her, stab her. It's not hard. Yet, but she's a fucking feather man. Another said, deathless fight those things, not us. Yet. A third said to the side. If you're so sure of yourself, why don't you go and take the first stab at her? A shorter one in the back seemed to be breathing rapidly, chest plate drawing in and out. Then he screamed. I'm no fucking coward. The hell with surrendering to a fucking scrap head. Steel rusts but the flesh rebuilds, my mind over metal. She saw him charge, sword taking a rooted stance in his hand. Saw him close the distance. Saw how the rest of the night remained behind, a hairbreadth away from joining in. He was young. While she couldn't see his face due to the relic armor helmet, she could tell the boy was likely within his early 20s at the latest. The stance he took was sloppy, no focus on his legwork, though he held the sword correctly. He'd been trained, enough to have a semblance of it. Tarath took a step forward, memories of a different life flowing through her mind. She took upon the stance of Nagaru, flowing like water. Feet light, she reached out to him, watching as he shifted his blade to block. With speed and alacrity, she twirled around the defense, striking out with the full length of her blade across his chest. The shield lit up bright, absorbing the hit. The feather followed through, twisting a knife into his back, further breaking down his shield. The boy tried to swing back at her, a large overly telegraphed attack she had no trouble ducking under, while her sword flashed out again. This time, the boy's shields cracked, the occult blade cutting through a corner of his chest. Metal and flesh vanished behind the blade. He took a step back, as if surprised. His head turned down to look at his wound, watching as the red blood began to pour out staining the metal, before his reflexes warned him. He had just enough time to look up as Taratha's sword ran right through his helmet, in and out, without the slightest resistance. The body slumped down on its knees and then fell to the right with a dull clunk. The fight had lasted a few seconds at most, with the majority of the time being spent on that short pause just before she'd ended his life. There was silence among the Undersider Knights, many of them taking a step back. She'd killed humans before when she was a spider. Many in fact. There hadn't been a single one that had ever escaped her once she'd claimed them as hers. All except for one, but she would deal with him soon enough. This, however, was beyond what her old body had been capable of. Tarath felt powerful. Surrender, she said to the surrounding knights. Or die. A wave passed through them. Then, as if there was some unworded command, several charged forward as one, swords reaching out to her. Tarath licked her lips as she hunched down slightly, feeling a thrill come alive inside. The lady had made her kind to be killers at heart. This was what she had been made to do. Her blade sung through the air, her leaps brought her all the space she needed, wings stretching out as she jumped. They tried to follow behind, using their own armors to leap far higher than humans were ever meant to do. And inside her domain, they quickly realized their mistake. She killed the second before he landed back on the ground. Once more her blade neatly punctured a hole in the helmet, while she pushed the dead body back down with her sharp legs. With lightness that lied about her weight, she landed without a sound on the ground as the rest of the knights hit the planes like metal paperweights. Surrender, she told them again. Or die. Fury took them. They charged again, yelling incoherently, desperate to at least do some amount of damage. Tarath was faster. Her eyes saw weakness to exploit in every move. Their schools of combat were too generic. Made to tackle a wide range of possible shapes and monsters, and highly off-key against a foe like herself. Undersiders didn't fight each other with the same ferocity that the surface dwellers were forced to. They might laugh at the barbaric surface dwellers, who lived miserable lives of poverty, always hungry, living in tight cramped spaces, never truly warm. But it was well known that only the Imperial Knights or a Puritan Blade Priest could stand and defeat Surface Knights. Everyone knew surface dwellers were not to be messed with. Child soldiers who live in breath combat, wild, feral, and taught to kill without hesitation. Thieves at best. Emotionless murderers at worst. Not completely inaccurate. The third one she killed had tried to tackle her to the ground. She'd twisted under him, flowing away, all the while raking his side with the dagger. The shield broke, and her blade whipped through the air, penetrating from the back of his neck and driving straight up through his head and out. The body stiffened for a moment, then relaxed as she withdrew the blade. The fourth was killed a moment after. He's tried 2 swings at her, which she had dodged all the while stabbing out with knife and blade. The moment his shield broke, panic ripped into him, his stance faltered, he tripped backwards falling flat on the ground, raising a hand up to shield his face, screaming in terror the whole time. It made no difference of course. Her occult longsword pierced right through the palm of his hand and dove down through his helmet. The body jerked, that outstretched, now limp, hand cut itself free from her blade as gravity brought it back down. The fifth had been smarter. He'd tried to strike at her back. The surface dwellers had dozens of different counters to exactly that situation. It was such a drilled-in instinct, none of the 3 combat schools placed any of these moves above basic instruction. Any novice should know these counters by heart within the year. And of course, with her stolen skills, she claimed all of that knowledge for herself. Tarath ducked and weaved around his ill-thought strike, leaving her blade positioned to catch his chest, disbalancing him with a tap of her dagger and a well-placed trip. His own inertia had him run and push against the long blade. He flinched back, realizing his shields were rapidly draining as the blade remained firmly in contact with his armor. A snake-like strike from Tarath, tapping his sides, whittled away the last of his shields as he continued to backtrack. The man lifted his arms straight up, letting his occult blade go free, yelling all the while, "I surrender! I surrender, please, oh goddess, please! Don't kill me!" The feather halted her strike at the last moment, the long sword tip hovering with a slight quiver, right before his helmet, mere inches away. She tilted her head with curiosity, withdrawing the blade back slowly. "I accept." Tarath felt satisfied. Now the humans had seen how real and present the threat she posed to them all was. All the speed of a machine. All of the skill of 10-cent Winterscar. No undersider had a chance against her. And they'd also seen a way out. The rest of the knights stared at the sobbing man, now collapsed on his knees, hyperventilating at how close he had come to dying. They gawked up to Tarath, now wiping the gore off the flat of her blade, with little hurry. The unasked question lingering in the air of who was next. The realization that this was not some well-practiced hunt flooded through their minds. How one moment, they would be here and alive, and the next, find a blade slipped through their skulls and then nothing. Occult long swords clattered on the ground. Hands slowly raised up, hesitantly, as the survivors all took a few steps back. The feather nodded, sheathing her weapons. Tamery had been right. She peered over to the fortress in the background, where smoke and fire had already begun to rise. All sounds of clashing blades and screaming had come to a stop. Only the sound of burning tents and campfires remained. The first of many. Book 2, Chapter 25, You Should Gloat. You should gloat. Cathita whispered in my ear like the proverbial devil on my shoulder. Seems like the best time to me, dearie. The clan lord sat at the table reviewing the footage of our fight, while we kneeled before him. Shadowsong and I remained silent, waiting for judgment. Atias had been watching without a word for the past 5 minutes as he pored over every bit of footage. Cathita, I hissed, not right now when the fucking clan lord is in front of us. This is serious. That's exactly why you should gloat, of course. But fine, ignore my wisdom. Be boring. See where that gets you. She gave an exasperated groan before going quiet. It was honestly impressive how much her voice conveyed expression. I'd never seen an old wrinkled woman roll her eyes and wave me away as a pest before, but somehow I now had a perfect mental picture of that. Lord Atius took off his helmet and set it to the side, drawing me back to the present. I presumed he was done watching and was current with events. Accusory. He said slowly, every time I've told you to trust in me, have I ever broken my word to you? The Shadow Song Prime remained kneeled, staring directly at the ground. No, my lord. Not once. Then why choose now to break that trust? We discussed this in depth only hours ago. Shadow Song remained still, and only spoke once he was sure of his words. I began to have paranoid delusions that the Winterscars had somehow fooled you. The recent loss of Tennycent, and then watching my daughter possibly leave on a mission of no return warped my judgment. I say this not as an excuse, only to inform where I went wrong. The old Deathless shook his head slowly, taking a moment to think. My word is absolute in this clan. When I made my judgment on who to send, I did so carefully and with measure. I don't think you properly understand how monumentally foolish this stunt was, and the potential cost it could have to the clan as a whole. I've never seen Atius angry before, though admittedly, I haven't spent a whole lot of time around the clan lord yet. The weight of disappointment in his voice felt somehow worse than outright anger, and I wasn't even the target of it. How did you let your feelings cloud your judgment this badly? Especially now of all times, when the clan's greatest threat in centuries is breathing down our necks. I needed you here for stability and order. And here I find that you've been outside in a blood feud. I have no excuses. Shadow Song said, voice low. Tempers flare up, that's inevitable. I get that. But I expect them to be handled in the Ring of Swords, like civilized men. Not with occult blades raised up, and absolutely not outside on the surface. You don't realize how close you were to costing the clan everything. I charged Keith with a mission, the discovery of which might tip the scales of the entire war. And you nearly killed him. All because you let your biases, old grievances and fear blind you. I understand and will accept any judgment from you, my lord. You certainly deserve judgment, but not by my hand. Atius turned his gaze to me next. Keith, as per clan law, I leave remediations to be settled between you and accusory. If no settlement can be reached, then return to me and I will handle it. He gave Shadow Song a withering look. Though I highly doubt such a thing will come to pass. Accusory, dismissed. Reflect on your actions, and be prepared to set things right. The man gave a quick grunt of acknowledgement before standing tall, turning on his heel and marching away out of the room. The clan lord watched his steps, an old expression of fatigue in his eyes. When the door shut, he turned those eyes back to me. It was quiet for a moment. Only the sound of a few candles flickering away in the room. I knew that lad back when he was a boy. Atius said. Feels almost like I stepped back a few decades into the past just now, having to discipline him like this again. He knit his hands together, glancing down at them. It's sometimes hard to shift my mind as people grow. One moment, I think of them as a tiny whelp. The next, I realize they're already 35, married and planning to sire a whelp of their own. Blink again, and they're old and retired. No matter the number of years I've gone through, it always comes as a surprise to me and always at the oddest times. He chuckled, somberly. And occasionally, they do something so monumentally foolish, I find myself back to thinking of them as a whelp for a few moments. Had a temper back then, that one. It would flare up, and violently with something broken, and leave only shame at himself the moment after he got hold of his senses. I suppose such demons never truly go away, even as an old man. He simply learned how to mask and control it instead. He stood, walking over to me. Do leave him some room for his pride when you make your demands from him. Ultimately, it was a mistake that stemmed from me at the root. I knew I would need to take the chance and give some knights the winter blossom technique, the situation all but demands it. I only hesitated too long, overthinking. He sighed, a long drawn-out thing, staring at a mural of knights fighting off a twisted splash of white and violet color. No details discernible by the artist's choice, more bringing out a feeling of chaos being held back by blue-colored swings of occult swords. How are you faring from all this, lad? I lifted my head a bit. Surprisingly, I feel fine, I said. And I meant it too. I held off Shadowsong for 4 minutes in a strict 1-against-1, no-holds-barred fight. Most people don't even survive for 30 seconds in the Ring of Swords. If there was ever a mark of my improvement, holding my own against the current greatest duelist in 100 miles, this would be it. The moment I correctly got the Winter Blossom technique working, I knew I was safe from getting killed. The rest was a standard duel. Standard? Atias chuckled. Odd definition you have of that. Fair point, but when has my life ever been anything normal? Guess this is par the course. Too many secrets floating around, something's bound to blow up. The clan lord went quiet at that, staring at the mural. I couldn't tell which knights were drawn there. Not because the panel resolution was too poor to make out details, the pixels were bright and sharp. No, it was that none of these knights were recognizable to me, with exception for the figure on the left. The great cloak gave it away. Secrets? Atias said. Reveal too much and it burns your hand. Too little, and people break rank in unexpected ways, trying to work with an incomplete picture. 400 years and it's still not an exact science to me. He turned and walked over to where I knelt, tapping me on my shoulders lightly as he passed. Stand back up, lad, time we had a talk about what you've been up to in the shadows. This is as good a time as any. I did as bid, rising off my knees and following him deeper into the audience chamber, to a smaller table. There we both took a seat. I took off my helmet, setting it down to the side. Word already reached you? I asked him. He nodded. Something like that. Reports noted that you practically vanished for a full week, only appearing like a ghost from the walls to sleep in your room. No one knows where you vanished to. Now you're back, active again. Whatever experiments you were running in seclusion has either been abandoned, or unraveled. And I know enough about you to toss out the first theory. I gave him a grin. Hit center mass. Finally found out how warlocks forge occult blades. I can smith as many of those blades as we need now. Atias had a pensive expression on his face, almost frozen. Then he sat back, as if taking the news in. How many people would have given everything just to hear those words, I wonder? He smiled. The single most guarded secret in the world, and you've uncovered it. Ha! Those warlocks would be fuming if they only knew. You've done excellent, Keith. Absolutely excellent. You went up against historical odds, and where hundreds failed before, you succeeded. There was something deep down inside that bloomed into life in me. A warmth, that I'd finally done something truly impressive for once in my life. Recognition. I basked in it, soaked it in like a sponge. The clan owes you a heavy debt. This discovery will directly save the lives of thousands. Ask of me anything you wish, and it will be done. I fumbling, a little awkward at the praise, I don't need anything. He laughed, eyes closed as he rocked back slightly. Right now, perhaps not. But once you have time to think, you will. Oh, you will. He said, tapping his head with a finger. The resources of Clan Altosk are at your disposal. Any idea you wish to pursue, I'll order entire houses to assist. It doesn't matter to me how superfluous or eccentric of an idea you have, lad. Even if it ends up being a complete waste of resources. It'll be done. The price for the Winter Blossom technique and the secret of forging occult blades is worth it all. How did those clever little bastards hide their mark anyhow? They've fooled the entire world for centuries on end, it must have been something to crack. They put it inside the hilt, of course, I said, embedded it right into the center of the metal. Reality doesn't care if the runes can be spotted by humans or not. A simple difference in chemical composition that we couldn't possibly see is enough. I dove into the details, eager to explain the full depth of the work I did. Atius listened, attention completely focused. I gave him every detail, the whole scope. He'd ask questions occasionally, especially on the soul fractal and my thoughts on why the warlocks hadn't come up with a counter. I gave him some new information to mull over, as he put it. Kedra had already told him of the winter blossom technique she'd perfected while I'd been busy tinkering with that knife, so all detail was spent on my discovery. Atius explained to me his own side of events. Your sister told me of the technique you'd come up with and the improvements she'd added. I spent a few days on my own attempting to replicate it, and training with her personally. You trained her? She never said a word to me about that. Gods, when did you even find the time? Atius grinned at that. I've learned a few tricks over the years. Some tricks I can be very good at. Others, like this technique of yours, elude me. It didn't work for you? I asked, curious. He shook his head. No, I couldn't even move my soul into the fractal, and I felt none of that sense of concept around me like Kedra described. We both stopped for a moment, thinking. Could it have something to do with you being deathless? That was my first suspicion. I've long known I'm a step removed from being human. My soul itself might be different between us, naturally. It's interesting to learn something new about myself. Novel, really. You don't seem too disappointed at being unable to do the same thing Kedra does. He waved a hand off. I can't be too greedy now, lad. Besides, increasing my own power isn't what will help the clan the most. What's wonderful about this technique is that every knight could potentially use it. That was far more important to me than being able to personally make use of this. The future looks bright. When I was done with my tale, I felt lighter. As if I'd taken off a weight on my shoulder. He leaned back, pondering for a moment. Then he gave a light shrug, and turned to me. I'm wondering what path to take with you next. Elevate you up and have everyone in the clan know that you are the first sorcerer knight? Or keep all this hidden like a dagger that we can shiv our enemies with when they least expect it? He brought a hand to his beard, stroking it in thought as he spoke. The more people know, the larger the chances of leaks. However, surface dwellers aren't as loosely lipped as the undersiders or the othersiders. Duty here is an iron backbone I can rely on. If we give occult blades to our soldiers and swore them to secrecy, even if we have near 1,000 take up arms, the chances of discipline slipping is non-existent. It would take several thousands before the chances that someone slips begin to move up. Our relic knights, now those I have full faith they can keep and hold any secret. The winter blossom technique would be safe in their hands, and they would have the discipline to use it only when needed, fooling their opponents into thinking their speed is average and only occasionally increases at what seems like lucky moments and close calls. It all comes with a balance of good and bad, lad. He lifted his right hand up, as if holding on to something in the flat of his palm. On one hand, if I expose you to the whole clan as a sorcerer knight, morale would skyrocket and we could more openly make use of your discoveries without hiding. Anything you discover and create can be used freely in the open. Our knights would all move at full speed from the start, calling their opponents with alacrity unmatched in minutes. However, word will surely reach the other clans, and eventually the undersiders. The warlock whelps will come for us within the next few years. The only reason they haven't destroyed each other already is due to a fine balancing act between the lot. But if they could, they would take out their competition in a heartbeat. If anything could unite them, it would be a rogue entity like ourselves spilling their secrets. We'd have to negotiate a pact of sorts, or find ourselves in another war. His left hand was raised next, as he set down his right. If we hide your true skills, giving only the minimum to the most trustworthy, we will surely lose some lives over that decision in the immediate term. Our knights would take longer to wear down the enemy ones, as they need to pretend to be regular knights that just so happen to be oddly quick when the metal is put down. Our soldiers will hide their occult blades until the last moment, drawing them out more in an ambush than a full fight. Any inventions of yours with this new discovery will need to be far more controlled and done with precision so that no enemy remains alive to tell the tale. You have a choice in mind? I asked. He tilted his head to the side. I think an exception should be made on who chooses the path. This discovery is yours. I would have you decide how best to use it. If you seek recognition, you will have it. And I will handle the fallout that happens one way or another. Take your time to consider, and then let me know what you pick. I stayed silent at that, a little shocked. This wasn't just a small choice, it would possibly change the future. Am I in any way qualified to make a decision on this? I asked. He grinned. No. But as I said, this discovery is yours. And I have confidence in the clan and myself that we can navigate what comes next. There's uncertainty, there's always uncertainty. We've always found a way forward, regardless. Still, if the responsibility is too harsh, letting me decide is a valid choice as well. What would you have picked? I asked him. The math is cold, and I have to be colder for such choices with these stakes. I think you already know which choice I would make. He reached into his pocket, armored hands withdrawing a small USB key. I don't expect an answer right now. I want you to think on it. About what you want out of life, and the clan. He said as he placed the key carefully on the table, and slid it over to me. In this flash drive, are my own secrets that I'll share with you. These are the pictures I took on my journey through the underground. The fractals on each pillar that grant deathless their powers. They're categorized, along with all the spells I have kept and used. I give them to you, in hopes you might discover a method of making use of them yourself. Perhaps you really will become a sorcerer knight and bring a new era to the world. Or it might be a fool's quest, and end with time wasted. Regardless, I believe it's worth the chance. Do you think it's safe though? I asked, reaching out for the key. When I wrapped my hand around the small key, his gauntlet clasped mine and held on. The circumstances force our hands with the occult. It's simply too powerful to ignore given the war that's coming. But I haven't been sitting on my laurels this past week either. I went searching to find what's been cleaning up history. I believe I might have found a possible direction, though I need to confirm sources. For the moment, take care to only work with fractals that see general use and the ones in the key. I nodded, understanding his message. He let go of my hand and drew back. Speaking of general use, the warlock guilds, of course, have an entire arsenal of weapons that never leave their hands. By holding on to advantages no one else has, they remain unchallenged. However, I suspect that they never trusted real engineers enough to have them make greater or more creative weapons with their secrets. And why change what already works? They've grown complacent. Fat and lazy in their status quo. We have a unique opportunity as you happen to be both an engineer and a budding warlock. An excellent combination. Are you up for a challenge? Always. I answered, grinning back. He leaned forward. Tell me, have you ever heard of the warlock's occult crossbows? I believe we might do better. For starters. Book 2, Chapter 26, The Names We Carry, T. Tarath observed the kneeled humans. The camp around her had stopped burning down about an hour ago, all the tents gone, while the rest of the buildings were mostly safe from the flames. Her chosen would be arriving to pick up the leftover supplies, once she'd dealt with the prisoners. Humans were fragile creatures in the end. Even with the Pale Lady's gifts and modifications, her ex-humans still needed to feed and house themselves. This outpost would serve well in terms of location. Your will? The old runner asked at her side, coolly watching the captured humans. There were 70 of the undersiders left. Armors had been stripped and taken from each, though many were servicemen without armor of their own. Weapons had been collected and piled away, to be processed. Caravan skivvies were seized and so were the trade goods they held. She walked by the line of prisoners, a few looked back at her before shifting their gaze back down to the ground the moment she met their eyes. Send them off. They are to return to their city on their own. And bring word of her to the humans. If she was to negotiate any quick victory, the humans required a sense of trust that she would follow through with her terms. Trust had to begin somewhere. She rose her voice slightly, so that they might overhear her discussion. I gave my word they would be granted safe passage back to their homes should they surrender. They have. And so now I must follow through with my part of the terms. Like insipid venom, knowledge of who she was would seep inside the walled city, cycling around by word of mouth, breaking down the city's morale from the inside out. Each outpost she took, each mercy she allowed, all would slowly build up a reputation that would eliminate soldiers from the fight without having to expend energy killing them. The humans before her weren't released prisoners. They were her unwitting weapons. Journey is long. The old runner said at her side. Humans need food. I learned. I did not offer food or provisions. Only a safe passage. If pain from hunger, not a safe passage. Tarath tilted her head in curiosity. Not out of what the runner had said, but of what it meant. The runner was disagreeing with her. Bold of him. Tuekar would have surely had the machine ripped apart as an example to the rest on what to avoid. Even Tarath would have been attacked if she had challenged her mentor on any point. It was in his name and nature to do so. She realized she had a choice here to make. Either discourage this kind of independent thought or let it go free. The feather pondered for a moment and then decided she had thus far been well served by having multiple dissenting opinions to compare from. Her nest hadn't been one voice, it had been many. So too, she would run her army as. A web was only as strong as the sum of individual weaves, and grew stronger when threads were not all parallel. I understand your logic. This is a fair point. I will amend the terms. She told the runner, then turned to one of the prisoners. An older man with a white beard, his clothing denoted him as a serviceman. How fast do you travel? How long will it take you to reach your city? He glanced up at her, then looked to his right. Not finding whatever he was searching for, he turned to the left, sticking his head out further to see a longer distance. Again, all the humans avoided his gaze. There was fear in his eyes when he turned slowly to look at her. Subroutines marked it at a 94% confidence. Speak. She ordered. We usually take a caravan. The city is about a day on one of those. He said feebly, slowly pointing a hand out to one of the hovering skiffs. There were about a dozen, all idling around now that they had been emptied. Long enough to house about 10 to 20 humans, if crammed. She made a quick tally in her mind, deciding on what direction to take. Each of you will take 3 units of ration for the trip. You do not need more than that. Her chosen needed the food more than these prisoners did, but the runner had made a point that they should have at least some rations to solidify a safe passage. Humans could survive without food for some time, but it would go against the spirit of her promise to send them out with nothing. You will be allowed to take 8 skiffs. The rest of the skiffs will stay. These skiffs could be used by her ex-humans to move around without tiring them out. The rest of the rations and supplies will stay with me. The old runner nodded. Food for chosen. Food for you. Tarath supposed she hadn't yet sampled what the rations held here would taste like. The runner had no means to eat, so to taste anything it would have to be through her. Fine. She decided, food for me too. I will share with you. The old runner nodded with more vigor, claws clicking together as he hunched over. He seemed impatient now, so the feather indulged him by letting her wings take over movement, zipping across the ground as the runner's gait took him directly to the warehouse storage. It occurred to Tarath that this machine had no name. Something to fix. You need a name, she said, floating by his side, easily keeping pace with his large strides. I have a name, the machine answered. That took the feather by surprise. When? How? The runner stopped in his tracks, and turned his gaze, searching for something far away from the camp. Old human. She named me. You. Rag. Of. Bones. Bones when short. Yerob? What does it mean? Yerob turned, stopped, and then thought for a moment. His shoulders raised and fell in a shrug. Don't know. How can you not? You were named. It must mean something. Maybe. Maybe not. Bones I am to them. Yerob I am to us. That is not maybe. Perhaps it really did mean nothing besides the surface message. She wasn't sure how Yerob would live up to his name, it seemed too vague and directionless. Yerob seemed to have taken it in stride, as if the name held no hold over him. It was Blizzard to Tarath, but then again, the old runner had been named by an ex-human. Not by a machine. They wouldn't understand the sense of purpose a name would grant. It was curious how some of the ex-humans were adjusting to her army. The runner had made odd friends with an old lady who'd taught him to cook, while others hid away anytime he lumped around their camp. Perhaps the future would look different. Yerob might be the first of his kind to truly synergize with the Chosen, though Tarath couldn't figure out a way of turning this into a military advantage. She would need to ponder this more and study the interactions for hints at a possible manner to maximize benefit. Tamery. She called out, reaching through the fractal of unity to connect to the girl. Select 51 of your best warriors. Outfit them with the captured armor. Approach the camp only when all of the humans have been sent away. Tuekar had taken all the knights among the Chosen, leaving only the weak behind. To make more use of her Chosen, they would need to be outfitted with armor, and she had great need of them to handle with one particular fortress the city relied on. Machines held control over many of the might forges, however the creation of armor was beyond what the automated forges could make. Only the mites could create armor now that the technology had been lost to all sides. I can do that, my lady. But, we don't know how to use relic armor. Tamery said, voice going small and quick as if worried of her master's reaction. None of us were ever in the guard, and the ones that were, got picked by Lord Tuekar for his own expedition. Tarath tut. No issue. I will teach you how to use and fight in relic armor. She had, after all, the memories and skills of a master. How hard would it be to teach these skills to her Chosen? It worked out well. The Undersider style of combat was unsuited to her new Chosen, their enemies will all be human after all. But the surface style of fighting? An excellent fit, that had been made to cut down humans. She would make good use of the Chosen. They would be a card she would keep close to her hand, the knife in her sleeve, until the best moment came to use them. Tuekar had been right. If you want to kill a human, there's no greater monster at killing humans than another one. A data package arrived through the connection that spanned across the machine network. A message from Tuekar, her mentor. Curious timing as she'd just been rewatching her earlier discussions with the feather. I am nearing their nest, my dear sister. His voice came up. Soon the pests will be scattering in every direction when I lift the little rock they're hiding under and shine a light on the wretches. Be a useful little assistant and deal with them when they come. The message ended. No reply expected. She would be prepared when the time came. Her enemies would be arriving in her domain. And with them, the score that was left to settle. Soon. Book 2, Chapter 27, Chosen. The expedition returned 5 days after my civil disagreement with Shadow Song. This was notable, since it wasn't scheduled to return for another month. That part wasn't quite as large a gossip point as the second reason people were paying attention, the expedition had returned with 3 more airspeeders than it had departed with. Specifically, other-sider airspeeders like the ones the pirates had used. From my vantage point by the tower control, I could see the cloud of white trailing snow behind the line of distant grey and black specks. Aetius peered out, across the frieze. Hands folded over his chest, a look of contemplation across his features. We'd been talking earlier in private when servants came to inform him of the arrival. The clan lord and myself had been working together far more closely after I'd made my choice. I'd talked to him in detail about it, trying to understand if it was a choice, a test, or some kind of offer. I wasn't great with politics, and the kind of subtle messages I could pick up were usually around the level of publicly posted hate mail. He'd laughed a bit when I'd asked him about that. At a certain point in time, all options become unpredictable. Any choice we make will bring its own hardships, and either choice we make, we will be there to handle those hardships. Consider instead, our ultimate destination. With this new resource and power, we won't remain on the surface for long. Not within the decade. Given the scope of your discovery, I felt it was fitting to allow you a hand in it. I trusted we could handle the fallout. Being able to gloat was one of life's great pleasures. However, I was already a celebrity among the clan. And the possible future threats made me reconsider exposing my hand in all this. Plus, the first option was still always available going into the future. Conversely, once the secret was out of the bag, there was no putting it back in. He had been smiling that day. Now, a frown came across his features as he stared out that window. Did they send any other information on the additional airspeeders arriving? No, my lord. The man answered back without looking. We only know they're non-hostage and friendly. No secret distress codes have been sent. Aetius sighed. I have that gut feeling something off is happening. One of those days. He turned over to another Logi staff member, one in Aetius's retinue that had followed us from his estate to the air control tower. Call up the knights and guard, have them arrive at the hangars. Place heavy patrols around the entryway, and prepare for a possibility of infiltration. Given what's coming, we can't play too recklessly. The lack of distress codes only means the captains aren't aware of any enemy activity. Not that enemy activity isn't there. The staff members nearby saluted, then instantly returned to their task with renewed vigor. Suppose it's time to greet new friends, he said, turning and making his way out. The airspeeder's engines cut down, vector thrusters keeping the whole ship steady as the taxi slowly dragged the lumbering beast back inside. All across the outside, scavengers sat on their benches, waiting for the all-clear to jump off. It didn't take long. The massive hangar doors slowly sealed shut behind the airspeeder, vents all across the hangar lit up with warm air once the gate were down. Engineers and repair staff from the inside of the hangar scurried over to ship, tools and instruments ready for inspection, while the returning scavengers leaped off, passing by as a wave to see friends and family first. The two groups collapsed against each other, patting backs and giving hugs or hand claps as they crossed paths. The captain of the expedition made his way down the ramp, and next to him was a relic knight I wasn't familiar with. That knight's armor was barren, like Winterscar. However, instead of accents of color and sigils, there were only a few pins on the side of the neckpiece, along with a stripe of purple color on the opposite shoulder pad. A simple fur cape and hood was the last of the ornaments, but it had no distinct color besides brown against stark white inner fur. The figure held onto a large staff, with a purple half-moon emblazoned at the tip and purple flowing cords trailing off to the side. Whoever this knight was, no house from our clan knew the answer. Though they looked like a religious figure of some kind, given the staff. Don't like that. Cathita hissed in my ear. Who in the 12 hells wears purple like that? Imperials wouldn't wear purple, that was considered the colors of the enemy. And Cathita cared a lot for looks too, so it's not surprising she's upset about this knight's very presence. Puritans, at least from the words I'd heard, had a far more utilitarian style of dressing. many pockets, straps and face masks. No main color theme besides muted colors that fade well into urban environments. And hats. They liked their hats. The religion ascribed that living beings were superior to machines, with a focus on seeing machines as renegade tools to be brought back into line. It made sense they'd dress for utility. I'd never seen purple being used like this before, which set me on edge slightly. Not sure who that is, I said. I guess we'll find out soon enough. Cathita grunted. I'd keep my eyes peeled for something. Purple. Purple. What a stupid assemble. Makes my skin crawl. You don't have skin. Oh, don't be such a wiseass. Fine. Don't pay attention then, I'll just head off. I've got to practice saying I told you so in exactly the right pitch. It's a point of pride for us older folks, young man. She said, then cut the line. I didn't say I wouldn't keep an eye out, I put in, but she was already sulking in the background now. It's fine, she has the memory space of a goldfish anyhow. Lord Atius walked forward, greeting the captain with a good-natured hug and a follow-up amicable pat on the back. They spoke a bit, before the captain turned and motioned to the strange knight. Shadowsong stood at my side, along with Ironreach and 2 other knights. We were Lord Atius's official bodyguard retinue for today. When he took a glance at us, we knew the cue to make our way behind him and stand at attention. The stranger stood at the top of the ramp, pieces of purple cloth flapping about lightly from all the heating vents blasting the room. Then, he walked down to stand a few feet before the clan lord. Greetings, Deathless, he said with a deep bow. Given his appearance, it was a rather lighter voice. I can't see what he looked like under the helmet, but he didn't sound very old. I am Legis, a priest of the Chosen. Chosen? Atius asked, tilting his head to the side. I don't believe I've had the pleasure yet, lad. An off-branch of Puritans, I'd guess. The stranger shook his head. No, we are a new faith that appeared in the last few months as a result of recent changes in the world. Atius narrowed his eyes at that. Changes? I would be most happy to discuss that in a moment, Lord Deathless. Legis said. However, like you, I must tend to my flock first. We've followed behind your expedition, seeking temporary shelter as we make our way across the White Wastes. I'd like to make sure we have that. Captain Rengar mentioned he owed you a life debt. Atius said. Accommodations could be made, once I know more of the story. The captain himself came closer. My lord, the situation we encountered the Chosen are sensitive, he said, face covered by his environmental suit. I've ordered my crew to keep their silence for now, until we're sure what actions to take. Atius raised an eyebrow at the man. Might this have to do with the incoming raider threat? That caught the captain by surprise. To his credit, he recovered almost immediately. Aye, sir. I should have guessed you would already be aware of it. Considering you've mentioned this out in the open, I take it the clan knows. Aye, lad. 'Bout a week ago I broke the news to the clan along with our plans. Morale remains high, we expect to be able to fight them off. The captain gave a hand sign for relief. Then yes, we met the Chosen during a dire situation. An attack force of raiders had tracked our expedition and set up an ambush at a site. I admit full responsibility when I state we hadn't been prepared. Small expeditions can expect fighting, but this was the main one with 8 airspeeders and 15 knights. I was lax in our precautions. No one in their right mind would dare launch an attack, or so I thought. It seems the raiders are exactly that. Out of their minds. Atius said. I don't understand their sudden change of plans either. I haven't yet divined just what stirred them into this frenzy. They must know it won't end well for them. The captain gave another hand sign for emotion, this one signaling warm agreement. Whoever they were, they came prepared. They attacked us with 25 relic knights. Not enough to overwhelm us within minutes, but enough to eventually win. It was an army unlike any I had ever seen before. The clan lord turned to glance at the chosen priest. I take it that man and his followers had a hand in you being alive to tell the tale. The captain also turned to the priest. Legis remained quiet, looking around the hangar, watching the life cycle of the crew. He seemed almost fascinated. The captain said. They heard our distress signal and emerged from the underground nearby where they'd been traveling. It was a stroke of fortune they were close enough to the surface to get signals in. Once we explained to them who we were fighting, they took to the field on our side. It took them some time to sprint to us, but they arrived. These chosen, they're undersiders, yes? Atius asked. Aye sir, they are. Undersiders that visit the surface. If they aren't imperial pilgrims, they're almost always a contingent of knights. Never travelers. How many knights came with the chosen? 23 knights came with our caravan. The chosen priest said to the side. The rest of the missionaries are simple men and women we were escorting to the next city. We left them underground during the actual fight. Atius hummed. Left them behind? I suppose this close to the surface machines wouldn't be nipping at your heels. Still quite risky. The priest nodded slowly. We have our ways of dealing with the machines. I was confident in my people's safety. I can explain later, it is a core part of our religion. Well, that was a shady answer. Clearly Atius wanted the answer as well, but was polite enough to accept the deflection. Very well, as I follow. The medal was turned on the raiders with 38 knights against their 25. How did the fight proceed? The captain of the airspeeder turned to look at the priest, as if giving permission for the man to explain. The chosen priest inclined his head in gratitude and continued, we struck from the rear of their attack. Our knights overwhelmed and captured a few of their airspeeders, before a general retreat was called by their side. Your people did manage to kill 2 of their knights in the fighting. Impressive given the odds against them. We're surface dwellers. The captain said to the side. Other siders serve only their own interests. Clan knights fight for far more than just their own life. The priest nodded, and to see them fight was truly something to behold. I've heard stories of surface knights, seeing them in combat was something else. The reputation was well deserved, with exception to the claim that you're savages. I see only men and women of compassion and humanity here. You've done well for your people, Lord Deathless. And the casualties? As strong as my knights are, the odds were still stacked against them. Atius asked, taking a look at the airspeeder hull. Signs of bullet holes appeared on closer look, along with frozen blood streaks. Small enough they hadn't been visible from a distance. We lost about 30 scavengers in the fight to gunshot wounds. A dozen more are wounded and kept within the medical bays of the airspeeders. The captain answered. The majority were killed early into the fighting before we could establish a defense. Once those had been set up, we were able to entrench ourselves. Their lives are on my head, my lord. Had I been prepared, many of them would still be alive. Our knights saved us. None of them had their shields broken, they held off the enemy long enough for the chosen to flank the raiders. We'll talk about mistakes later, Captain. Always lessons to be learned from any mistake, no matter how senior you are. You paid for this lesson dearly, I have faith you'll make sure not to pay that price again. Atius turned his gaze back to the priest. I suppose we owe your people a life debt to be settled then. You asked for hospitality. We did, Lord Deathless. Traveling underground has taken its toll on my people. I would like them to be refreshed and perhaps taught more about the finer aspects of environmental suits. We are still new to using them and hope to travel to the next city across the surface. Shadow Song stepped in at this point, priest. You've avoided explaining anything about your religion, twice so far. Instead you seem to wish to confirm hospitality before anything else. I find this suspect. Ah. That's a good point I hadn't noticed. The captain of the expedition gulped. My lord, that's something else I wished to discuss with you. We had a hard time accepting it ourselves, but a life debt is a life debt. But I swear to you, they are little more than normal people in need, and harmless. The priest in question turned to look at Aetius, which the deathless simply answered back with a sweep of his hand, a curious expression on his features. Proceed, tell us about your faith. Legis nodded. Very well. Forgive me for seeking safety first. The religion we follow is not particularly popular with people who hear about it first. Aetius glanced at the past anger manifest nearby. It seems to me you have plenty of members. Can't be that unpopular. We do have a great many things to offer. Some life-changing. But most of us did not join the faith willingly. Life sometimes offers only a single path forward, and leaves us only to make the best of that single choice. I take it this has something to do with the machines? You mentioned you had a method of keeping your people safe from them underground. Safe enough to leave them without knights. It is as you guessed, Lord Deathless. Recently the machines have changed. In the past, they've always attacked humanity without reason or method. Even the machines that could speak don't care to speak with us for any terms. The ones that seem lucid and sane, the feathers, your sworn enemies, seem to only care for destruction. He turned to look at his staff, the purple moon that would have surely pissed off any Imperial to no end. It'd be a cosmic joke if these chosen were the mirror opposite of the Imperials. Aetius peered at the purple half-moon. There was a look across his face that I couldn't quite read. Legis continued speaking in the meantime, my people were refugees once, cast out of our city by circumstances of misfortune. In our travels to find a new home, machines harried at our side, slowly whittling us down. Until one day, they stopped. And then one came and gave us an offer. It almost seemed like the hangar slowed down, people no longer talking, paying attention to the conversation happening here. Surface dwellers were incurable gossips. Of course they were all listening in on this. They still looked like they were ferrying goods and fixing items, but in truth I could tell they were all paying attention to our chat. An offer? Aetius asked, voice strained. Surrender. Legis stayed stock still. Renounce our gods and faith, and swear ourselves to their service. As I've said before, we had little choice, so we did as they asked. There was now total silence in the hangar. If a spanner dropped, it would probably be the noisiest thing in the whole room. The clan lord slowly turned to face Legis directly, one of his hands subtly resting on the hilt of his sword. You what? Book 2, Chapter 28, The Danger of an Honest Man. We walked silently behind the clan lord as he inspected the huddled people in the dim airspeeder. There was no noise, besides that of his boots, echoing with each step. Most of the people avoided our gazes, almost as if hoping we wouldn't single any of them out. Boot footfalls came to a stop, with the clan lord looming over a sitting woman holding tight a small girl. She had those telltale wrinkles of someone who's aged a lot faster than they should have. Hands were wrapped around the small girl with a death grip. A gaunt-looking face, with slightly sunken eyes. He knelt down slowly, so that his own was at the same level. What is your name? Cucula. She said, unconsciously holding the child tighter. The little girl whimpered, burying her face deeper into the woman's stomach. And what did you give up to join the chosen? The woman looked down, then raised one of her hands, bringing it to her mouth and biting down on the glove, using her teeth to take it off slowly. She hadn't wanted to let her girl go with the other hand. Under the glove was metal. Little gears inside moved as she turned and showed the prosthetic limb. A few of the panels were tinted purple, but the rest remained unpainted steel, scuffed already, which made the whole hand look dullen. These mechanical grafts had been fascinating at first, then slowly became eerie as we found all of these people had some kind of machinery either implanted inside them, or replacing entire body parts. An eye. A kidney. Hands, legs, even a jaw for one. Some had huge parts of them replaced. Those explained that they'd lost their limb fighting off the machines. Almost left for dead, and forced to amputate or die of infection. The whole explanation had been surreal, humans who served machines. That's who these people were. It wouldn't be a stretch to say these were traitors to humanity, by definition. The notion was so absurd to me, I felt more shell-shocked than outraged. The clan knights around the area had all nearly drawn out their blades when that priest explained in a calm voice exactly how they served the enemy of mankind. While the house soldiers had looked mostly confused at the whole thing. Honestly, there was a certain bravery in that priest to just announce their allegiances. I don't know if it was a calculated move, or what there was to gain from that. The captain of the expedition gave testimony to their character at least. Whoever, or whatever they were, they'd behaved well on the trip home. Before any talk of decisions were made, he was already pleading with the clan lord to offer mercy, that while he believed the chosen were misguided, that they weren't a threat. Walking through those airspeeders and seeing who the chosen were, I had to agree with the captain on how much of a threat they were. Did you cut your hand or had it been cut long before? Atius asked. No, I had to cut it. I was told to pick apart, and there was a forge we were led to, and medical beds that the mites had made and the machines. I see. You don't need to explain more. Your girl there, did she too have something taken? The woman nodded numbly, eyes still wide, as if expecting the clan lord to snap and attack at any moment. All while knowing there was absolutely nothing she could do to defend herself except curl up in a ball around her daughter and hope. Don't worry. I don't need to see it. Things will get better for you here, have hope. The clan lord rose up instead, done with the interview. He'd spent the last half hour walking from airspeeder to airspeeder, randomly speaking to the chosen. They were a miserable lot, wearing hastily put together environmental suits. Hand-me-downs from other-siders or sourced from cheap goods, none of them calibrated besides the default settings, so the efficiency was abysmal. The chosen hadn't been exactly popular with the undersiders. And it wasn't anything to do with them being chosen, no, they'd been chased off the city long before the machines came into the picture. So when they escaped the underground and were sent up to the surface, they didn't come with any maps, gear, or guides. No trade routes to follow, no food besides frostboom and melted ice water. They'd been making it up as they went. Frankly, the only thing going for these people is that the machines tolerated their presence at best, which gave them some leeway. Spotting the expedition had been as much a saving grace to the chosen as it had been to the expedition. They'd acquired airspeeders, and a grateful set of surface experts who proceeded to teach how to survive up here. The expedition crew had been taking glances at Atius and us as we walked around, everyone lingering in the hangars, trying to see what the ultimate verdict would be. Back outside the ramp, Atius stayed quiet as we descended down. Legis, the chosen priest, waited at the bottom. He turned his head up. Have you now a better idea of who we are, Lord Deathless? Unfortunately. Atius said. I'll need some time to consider what to do with you and your people. For the moment, you are all to remain within the airspeeders. Food, water, and warmth will be provided. I'll send for the engineer lads to patch up your environmental suits. Much of your equipment has been used incorrectly, they're breaking down. So the crew members of your expedition have shown us. I've never met surface dwellers until this expedition. I'm amazed at how organized and meticulous your people are. It's truly fascinating. Survival makes demands for all of us. You would know about that. Atius said. You are who you are because survival demanded it after all. He quirked his head to the side at that. At one point, yes. It was a miserable time at first, filled with terror and the unknown. I thought the machines would kill us all. Each day they didn't, however. I saw more hope for a way out, for peace. Every week, the choice to become chosen feels more like my own. The clan lord laughed at that, as if it was a clever inside joke between them. Of course. Of course you'd say that. You'd make a terrible priest if you didn't believe in what you preach. I was never supposed to be a priest in the first place. There wasn't anyone else doing it and someone had to. I started with vigils first, small prayer sessions. Always thought it was temporary, that someone else would take over. I think I fell into the role by accident. Fate has a sense of humor, as I've discovered. It loves to test us. Especially me. Aetius glanced back at the airspeeder, then his voice dropped a pitch. If any of your people are found trying to sneak away, they will be dealt with harshly. We're done here, for now. You don't trust us? Legis said, stating the obvious as Aetius walked past him. Trust has nothing to do with this. Only strategy. You worship the Pale Lady, lad. A sworn enemy of my kind. Now, if you'll excuse me, the sooner I confer with my people, the sooner we can come up with a reasonable plan forward. The priest gave a bow, as you command, Lord Deathless. I await your verdict aboard my airspeeder. Know that I welcome an open and honest discussion at any time. He then walked up the ramp, clearly intending to do exactly as he said with little fanfare. What a mess! Aetius muttered when the priest disappeared from view. With a sigh, he continued to the hangar doorways, waving a hand for us to follow behind. That one will be dangerous to deal with. Shadowsong scoffed. I saw no evidence the man knew anything of combat. Even his strides betray him. It's not his blade, armor, or skills that I fear for. An honest man who believes in a cause can move mountains. That's the danger he poses. Think it's all a trap? I asked. Without question. He said. A devious one with layers. I'm still unraveling all the pieces put into play from this. Did we stop it in time? Or should we bar them from entering the clan and throw them out? He chuckled at that. No. It's already been sprung on us. Damage was done a week ago. Their religion. Shadowsong spat. The crew have been exposed to the idea over the last week of travel with them. Befriended them even. Disgusting. It can't be that serious. Who in their right mind would side with machines? I said. I'd see them as a curiosity at best, but they still serve machines in the end. Did the expedition just forget about our homicidal neighbors? Aetius shook his head. How many surface dwellers have seen a machine before? That's, traders and knights, but no one else would have ever gone underground. I hadn't seen a machine my whole life except for a few pictures and wild tales up until just about a month ago. On the surface, the only real enemy is the freeze out there, and the people lurking around in it. That's what we've grown used to. Underground, the enemy is completely different. It's a matter of perspective. Aetius said. Hence why these chosen didn't quite understand just how dangerous the environment is up here, even though for us it's basic sense. Only when people see firsthand the danger of something does it become real to them, lad. Never forget that. A few guards were posted at the entrance to the hangar, including 3 knights. We approached the checkpoint, and Aetius stepped forward, switching his comms channel to open broadcast. If any of them leave the airspeeders, corral them back in. Keep an eye on the vents, no one leaves this hangar. Don't hurt them, but don't be afraid to lay order if needed. The knight in charge saluted, along with the rest of the blockade. We passed through the airlock, making our way into the bowels of the colony. Machines are more a mythical enemy. Aetius continued. They're not as real a threat compared to the freeze out there. The people won't have that gut understanding. Our knights and traders do, they've fought machines. The rest of the clan has only stories to work on. Idealism always seems plausible when reality hasn't been experienced. Can't we just give them supplies to cover the life debt and send them away? I asked. Cut the influence right at the head. And what of the next time people like them arrive? It's inevitable more of them will appear on the surface, spreading that religion of theirs. Sending them away is a wasted opportunity at this point. Atius said. I need to know more about who they are, what their goals are, who they work for, how they organize, and most importantly, how to disarm their rhetoric. The enemy blindsided us, but they've left their trap in our hands to make use of. You've considered their possible involvement with the raiders, my lord? Shadowsong asked. The timing of this does feel particular. I have. The other siders moved as a unified whole within the month. That sort of pull requires years of connections and networks. Something the Chosen likely didn't have the time to do. Word of their existence would have reached our ears if they had. Instead, their religion is new, even to me. Just because it's an unlikely coincidence, does not mean we should rule it out being a genuine coincidence. Regardless, lads, I need more out of them before I can make conclusions. We're only making wild guesses at this point. What of their relic armors? Shadowsong asked. 23 knights, all undersiders with no technique. It would be like crushing snow under our boots. Atius glanced at Shadowsong sharply, to which the prime sighed and lowered his shoulders. I know better than to attack guests we've offered hospitality to, my lord. I don't follow. I said. Why shouldn't we attack and seize their armor? That's 23 relic armors. 23. Sure, some people would get angry at the life debt being thrown out the airlock, but you're the clan lord. Ultimately, you can surpass traditions for a reason. I have vows of my own, Keith. Atius said. Lines I do not cross. And whoever is behind the Chosen, they knew this and counted on it. That's why they revealed themselves so brazenly. They knew I couldn't chase them out or kill them, not without true justification. But they're following orders from the machines. I hissed, they're not even hiding it. We just... Enough. Atius snapped, cutting me off. We know they are up to something, so what do you propose we do? Interrogate them all, kill them after and take their armors. Well, they're not that much better than raiders. Atius turned then on me, and there was a look in his gaze. Kala is a middle-aged woman who's seen nothing but hardship her whole life. The only thing that kept that woman going was her 10-year-old daughter. She did what she had to survive. I've seen hundreds in her boots before. I know the signs. Never catching a moment to rest and process what's happened, always being forced to move. Her life is a blur of terror, broken apart by the few times she sleeps. He flourished out a knife and passed it hilt first. I took it by reflex. His hand let go of that weapon, then snaked around and gripped my wrist, guiding the knife until the tip touched his stomach's plate. Would you walk into that airspeeder, stare that woman in the eyes, and stab her daughter right here in the gut? It would be easy. You have armor. None of them could stop you. Your blade would sink in without any effort. And when that woman throws herself over her dying child, sobbing and wailing, would you grab her by the hair, lift her up, and cut her throat? Would you look into her eyes, and see as despair takes her life before you do? Watch her realize in those last few seconds of her life, that all the suffering and hardship she'd gone through, an entire lifetime spent, all to die here, watching her child butchered and unable to do a thing. And no. I said, aghast. Then, how about casting them out and tell them to just go back underground? Watch as they fumble with their gear, making mistakes that pile up over time until they die up here, slowly freezing. Their airspeeder will go first, long before they find any way down. It'll crash into the ground and strand them. They'll send people out second for help. Those won't know what signs to look for, so most die when they don't judge their distances correctly and run out of power on the way back. Soon their ship heater will break down, and then the cabin grows cold within hours. The ones without environmental suits huddle together as the ship power runs out and the lights go out. Shivering in the dark. Still hoping the scouts found something, not realizing they're all dead already. They soon start to die, from the outside in. Imagine being in that pile, teeth clattering, not knowing if the friend by your side is even alive, or if you're clutching tightly to a corpse. The ones with suits are left in that cabin of the dead, still holding on to some hope that help will come. Eventually they mismanage something, and their rebreathers fail. They die, their body forcing them to cough 100 times rather than breathe the frozen air, until they're suffocating, too weak to even shudder, and then the cold shreds their lungs. One or two of them might be lucky and stay alive to watch their friends die off one at a time. Then, eventually, their power runs out and it's their turn. He stood back up, withdrawing the knife back into his sheath. The knife would have been less cruel. We didn't say anything as our group continued to march through the corridors, in the direction of the markets. They're not the enemy, he said, finally. They don't know what they're doing, Keith, or why they're here. None of these chosen do. They're simply people. Refugees clinging to tatters of hope, sent up here to either die or find temporary shelter before they're cast back out again. And that's what makes all this such a perfect trap. None of them have been given any grand mission, except perhaps for that priest. Do you understand? I think I do, my lord, I replied. Atius nodded and made his way through the sliding doors at the end of the corridor. Behind was the entrance to the main district, filled with people moving around quickly to tend to their duties. Ironreach and a few other knights stood there, waiting to relieve Shadowsong and myself. I watched as the clan lord made his way through the market to his estate ground, leaving the pair of us behind. Shadowsong, of all people, reached out a hand on my shoulder. Don't feel so cowed, Winterscar. I was given the same lecture around your age. Different event, same resolution. The clan lord does not kill innocents. Neither through inaction, subordinates, or by his own hand. It's a line he has never crossed before. He does not fool around with such a weight, no matter how convenient. Out of the hundreds of years he's been alive? Not once. Shadowsong nodded. Not even once. Even if it cost far more for doing it. Consider from his point of view. The moment he succumbs and makes a choice like this, the next one becomes easier. And the one after. He's immortal. Over decades, more decades than man was made to live, he'll lose touch with reality one damning choice after another. The only recourse is to never take that first step into madness. I believe that is the only thing that truly terrifies him. But what do we do, then? The chosen are clearly up to something, hiding behind the refugees, and we're keeping them right here where they can knife us in the back. Okay, I understand most of them are just being used, but I don't buy that all of them are innocent. It only takes one of the scrap shits to sneak around and start stealing shit. I should know, I was one of those scrap shits once. Two hands can cause a lot of trouble, believe me. He gave a short chuckle, then took his helmet off, slowly. The matted black hair spilling out, giving his face a far more skeletal look. That is where we come in. We're not so restricted by a line in the snow. You said it yourself, the real enemy is hiding behind the chosen, using them as a smokescreen. One or more of them, hiding in plain sight. How do you catch an opponent that's hiding, waiting for you to look away? I could tell where this was going. And my head was coming up with ideas. You set up bait and a trap. Exactly. And when it comes to scheming traps, I can think of no better man than a Winterscar. You are the acting head of your house now. Time we made use of it. Book 2, Chapter 29, Sell You a Dream. The folder was dated for January, 8726. Inside, images along with matching text files. A journal of entries, years and decades apart. A small glimpse into the life of someone who'd lived far longer than any man had right to live. The journal entries of an immortal. I blinked twice looking at one of those text files and Journey opened both the image set and journal. The first images was of a waterfall, surrounded by green grass and vines, that looked to be someplace underground. There wasn't any hint of metal anywhere in the picture, except for the very center, cutting the waterfall in half. A massive circular pillar, with onyx cubes shaped in every direction massing at the bottom. The water struck those cubes, breaking apart in foam and brilliant white reflecting glitters. At the center of the pillar was the image of a fractal, though nothing else. It didn't glow either, only inscribed deeper into the pillar. Water streamed off the sides, clinging to the onyx squares on reaching the base. I could see a group of 3 others in the image, standing knee-deep in the shallow lake before the waterfall, each in relic armor of their own. They loitered around in every image I saw of this set, not always examining the actual pillar. Sometimes looking busy moving a crate or supplies out of a hover sled. Other times sitting on the black cubes, waving at the camera with a smile frozen in time. Looks like they'd set up a small group of tents on a dry flat rock in the lake. Found on expedition down to the 3rd reaches, alongside Furin, Gamma, JD, and myself. Right where Furin had previously scouted it out, 5 years ago. Mites have not changed the surroundings a great deal, though we have noticed a colony that's steadily migrating in this general direction. The pillar might appear elsewhere next we search for it. Furin explained this pillar holds the power of clairvoyance. An ability that grants a few seconds of knowing every possible outcome, all at once. Gamma chose not to integrate the power, rationalizing that a few seconds every few hours is not enough time to substantially change the outcome of a fight, despite Furin's arguments otherwise. Understandable, she never runs without a group. The contribution of one teammate in a chaotic skirmish isn't going to be noticeably improved by one member performing above their weight class for a few seconds. JD and I on the other hand both have had too many encounters against single foes. A few seconds at a critical junction could be the difference between victory or defeat. We will be setting camp here for the next 3 days, I'll have time enough to consider my choices. Although Furin warned that learning its full use requires a far more steep investment in time compared to other powers. JD is leaning to replacing one of her powers for this, and I admit the temptation is strong on my end as well. The advantages offered by this pillar can't be ignored. I logged the geolocation of this pillar for now. In case I return in the future, though I doubt the pillar will remain. I closed the files, opening another one. Again, an image of another pillar came up, front and center, this time with a small expedition group of knights. Armor was barren from them, similar to the chosen knights, though no purple motifs. Instead there looked to be some kind of insignia. The ground here was far more recognizable, a metal city, with this pillar acting as the very heart of it. Long pipes, embedded into the ground led up to the pillar, seeming to connect to the onyx blocks at the bottom. Found on expedition with the city forces of Talnator, with Gamma taking point. We are hunting down a machine locally named Ripsteel, whose lair is reported in the first reach underground. While we still haven't caught the damn monster, this pillar serves as a good resting point before we continue forward. Neither Gamma or myself know what powers this pillar holds, the locals don't have any records of Deathless visiting it in the past. Or if they did, they didn't leave any traces. Likely neither of us are going to take the gamble at a worse ability or one that doesn't fit the kit we've built up. This pilla's powers will remain an unknown for now. Location is suboptimal for a new city to be founded, but a pillar is a pillar. I'm keeping this in records on the event it needs to be found again to settle a city here. Once we deal with Ripsteel, the area will be far more safe. Pictures of people, some with their helmets off, smiling. Undersiders from that expedition, and given that the file was last modified 212 years ago, these people are all dead already. I was looking at ghosts again. There were dozens of pictures and journal entries like this, although most of them dated back 3 centuries. The rate of expeditions faded sharply after he'd founded the clan on the surface. I don't know what time scales the Chosen would use to mobilize on. Would they take a month to execute whatever plan they had? Or would they be rushing forward as quickly as possible, already assuming their days are numbered? Shadowsong and I had spent some time in the cold outskirts of the clan colony, speaking on possible plans and plots. The first rule of setting a trap was figuring out what kind of bait to use. Here's where we ran into trouble: neither of us knew what the Chosen were here for. So we'd have to spread the seeds far and wide until something was bit. Officially, their priest announced he'd traveled here to spread the gospel of the Chosen, in an attempt to settle a peace with the machines. He also offered supplies, weapons, even armor to help against the incoming raiders. And for anyone that was interested in running, he offered a home underground so long as they joined ranks with the Chosen. Unofficially, he could be here for anything. Shadowsong suspected this had something to do with the golden sphere we recovered from the underground. He'd seen it bounce out on the steps, and while he didn't know what it was, he was certain the machines wanted it. His idea was to use that as the base for the bait. We considered how to make a look-alike, but the glowing yellow wave-like pulse that shimmered on the outside wasn't something anyone could mimic with what we had to work with. And I don't exactly have any means to see the original orb since Atius has it locked up somewhere even I don't know about. I'd suggested making a metal box and plant rumors that we'd put the sphere inside it. That could possibly work. A chest could hold anything. The only other items of bait I had were Talon's book, and the Might Seeker. Both of which I might have a better chance at making a decoy, though less chances of the Chosen being here for those. Regardless, Shadowsong alerted me that from now on, I wasn't to remove Journey at any moment. The armor could handle all my hygiene issues, and it was somewhat comfortable enough to wear for long periods of time. I'd sleep, eat, and shit in this armor for the next untold number of days. Not a fun prospect, but I could understand. No more going out for drinks, dancing or trouble. The house servants and soldiers all took it in stride, changing up their routine and even changing the food menu for me so that I'd eat more liquid foods and minimize the time my helmet was off. The chicken wrangler and my old crew of misfits from different castes all understood the reasons. In his words, he didn't want any of the kind of trouble I was bringing around, and frankly the weight class of trouble I was dealing with these days largely overshadowed anything my old crew could handle. The stakes were no longer swiping a prize chicken or eavesdropping on the latest house gossip. My group of hanger ball told me I wasn't allowed to come kick their ball around in armor. Politely, of course. Teed on his end had sent me a few contacts with his own boys if I wanted some other engineers to prepare bait for the Chosen. Something I might need. Engineers can come up with some seriously deranged ideas when safety wasn't a concern. There was really only one person I was most worried about when sending word to. Elandri's Silver Stride. That was an old relationship from my past with heavy history. And if there was one person I didn't want to involve any of the possible danger coming up, it was her. She understood, as I knew that she would. That reply letter had been penned by her hand and it was clear she had a bone to pick. I was no longer invited to any future wedding of hers, but I set myself up for that one. This was the first time I'd sent her a message after getting home, and it was to tell her I wouldn't be seeing her again. Not so bad though. This would be the 10th time I've been disinvited from any future wedding of hers, a running inside joke since if she ever did marry, I'd be the last person the potential groom would feel comfortable seeing in the first place. Like I said, old and complicated relationship that one. Hence why I found myself laying down on the floor of my room, trying to get comfortable and not quite managing to do that. The bed would have broke if I sat down with the full weight of a relic armor. Shadowsong had told me knights quickly learned to nap in their armors, because removing it any time underground was asking to be killed. I needed to learn one way or another how to sleep in this thing. Do you think we could make use of any of these? I asked idly into the empty room, pulling up another set of images. This one was from a red jungle, massive tree trunks filled with crimson leaves, dangling down. They didn't look wholly organic either, with tinted lights glowing inside the trunks. Large white concrete blocks littered the floor of the jungle, and the pillar in this picture appeared at the center of a tree trunk, quite exactly. The tree seemed to have split into 3 different ways, creating a hollow space for the tower, with no roof. Here I saw multiple knights, all scaling the tree with climbing tools. Considering they each looked unique and distinct, I had my guesses this was a surface clan expedition, but not by any houses I recognized. Kathita vocally shrugged. You're going to try no matter what I say. So go and do your little experiments. Come back to me when you're done playing around. You don't see any use to any of this. Personally, dear? The sword is always something reliable. This, hocus pocus, well, even the deathless took gambles each time they came up to a pillar. As far as journey's concerned though, it increases the odds you live an encounter on average, so the armor's all for it. Don't ask me how it calculated that, but I can tell it's quite sure of itself. I nodded, thinking. The journal entry text flashed into view on command. Yvain and his clan were kind enough to escort me to the mirror pillar, as he called it. The power stored here allows a deathless to create mirror images of themselves, superimposed over a few seconds with a single instruction. He's used it time and time again, and I must admit after dueling him, I can see the advantages it allows. The trek here was difficult, but we've finally reached the pillar in the Red Wilds. The area is every bit as dangerous as was rumored. Machines here seem to be a new breed of four-legged monsters, adapted to moving across the thicker canopies, stalking and hunting our group. If Yvain hadn't already been an expert tracker in these parts, I fear we would have started to lose knights. He, at least, has full confidence in his own clan's abilities, and I was made to understand why shortly into the expedition. This is the first time I've fought alongside surface dwellers. They're not what I thought they would be. Rumors of their skills in combat were not exaggerated. These religious zealots learned to fight as children, and are ready to give their life at any moment. It's terrifying, in a way, how much power Yvain holds over these people. Anything he commands, they would carry out without question. I've spent days debating which of my powers to give up in exchange for the mirror images. I've made a choice to lose the explosive blast. Ultimately, that can be replicated by carrying ordnance. Mirror images cannot be replicated by tech in any way we have. The utility of this can come in handy for more than simple combat applications. I hope the return trip is faster than the descent. Though I fear this jungle isn't yet done with us, even if we are with it. Mirror images, the blue shades Atius had used during his single combat with Tuekar. I don't even know if I can use these, they're made for deathless. And? From what I've noticed, this whole spooky physics-breaking pocus isn't made for humans either, but warlocks are well and alive, even back in my time. Who says you can't dabble in deathless magic? Your little friend seemed willing to share at least, dear, it would be rude not to try. I rifled through the files, looking at the pictures of the red jungle, specifically the pillar at the center. The fractal there looked like something made of mutated triangles, all wildly spinning out of control, down into an infinite spiral. Mesmerizing in a way. Almost calling to me. Well, not like I was going to get any sleep anyhow. The Chosen had been given a space by the bottom of the colony, a small alcove of empty rooms. Those had been hastily reheated and insulated, the job being quick and dirty. Atius had picked it very carefully, as the floor plan showed there was only one entrance and exit. Easier to keep an eye out on our errant guests. They'd complied with the direction, and a worrying amount of the expedition crew had spent time helping them settle in. If only that had been the end of it. Their priest hadn't wasted a moment, already organizing food lines and helping his flock settle in their temporary transient homes. I'd only gotten a few hours of sleep yesterday, and the armor was already feeling itchy, like small prickles that appeared and disappeared the very next moment. I hadn't ever spent this long inside journey before, but knights wear their armor for weeks, even months if they're out on expedition. So it's more something I'd need to learn to live in. On the other hand, I could sit down and nap anywhere I wanted, the padding inside the armor would be the same no matter where I made a bed. The door before me opened up, as I crossed the barrier between the unheated sections and the outer reaches of my house. A few more steps into the estate and I ran into a servant, who'd made a quick dash to me the moment he'd spotted me. Turns out, they'd been looking for me for the past hour. The clan lord had gone to talk shop with the priest and called up his bodyguards. I'd been counted among the retinue. Relic armor could run fast, but once I applied the winter blossom technique, I could move as fast as the wind. Vault, stop, twist and jump just as quickly as well. The colony was filled with small holes all over the place, honeycombed in between the levels to allow for air to circulate. This gave the entire place a second superimposed map that only the shady undersurface of the clan knew about. The ones who needed to traverse the colony without being spotted. Shinobi, gangs, and mischief makers like me. Even my sister wouldn't be able to beat me here. I simply knew how to move across this kind of surface the same way one knows how to run. With relic armor, I soared through the well-memorized land. Jumps I hadn't dared to do before were now taken without a second thought. I'd take falls that would have broken my bones otherwise, hitting the ground with a roll, leaving a dent on the metal ground from the weight of the armor. I'll have to make a point to come back and have those fixed up. I passed people faster than they could recognize me, a blur of black and gold, appearing on one catwalk before leaping down to another and then out of sight. Reaching the chosen corridor took only minutes, and with one final swing, I landed right down the center aisle with a heavy thud, drawing a few startled looks. Surface dwellers were making their way down, many of them giving a quick look, and then offering bows in respect before continuing on their journey. I seemed to have landed right in the middle of a small pilgrimage, with people drawn to the end like moths to a flame. Just in time too. At the end of that corridor, was a more open courtyard, where a bonfire had been set up, crackling away. Smoke rose up and into the air vents, sucking it all up through the wind turbines. And on top a large box, right before the blaze, stood the chosen priest, Legis. Without his helmet, arms stretched wide and beckoning. When his own eyes met mine, he smiled. A wide, broad, thing, filled with joy that made my hair stand on edge. There was an intensity to his gaze that even the fire behind him failed to live up to. He was clean-shaven, a short military haircut, and tattoos that lined the contours of his face. I couldn't tell if he was 13 or 30. And Lord Atius wasn't here either. Had I arrived too early? Welcome all. The priest boomed out, many of you have come here out of curiosity, to see who we are and if the rumors you've heard are true. Others have come to debate our philosophy. And some of you may have even come for a new source of hope. I welcome you all equally. Gather around, and I shall tell you all the tale of what truly happened to the world, and how we might yet fit into it. I'll show you a dream you've all forgotten could be. The story of our world, from the other side. Book 2, Chapter 30, Follow me to the end of the world. The old Puritan tribes claimed that mankind built and ruled the world, once. Legis turned his gaze to the audience, making sure they were all watching. I have come before you today, to tell you that this is neither myth, nor rumor, it was true. Humanity was above all. Now, look around you, brothers and sisters. Who are we now? His hands turned to a reacher leaning on the side of a wall, pointing like an accusation. Shadows. Pecking away at the bones of giants rather than standing on their shoulders. The reacher bristled, eyebrows narrowing. The priest's hand then shot out and pointed at one of his own chosen. Dredges. Paralyzed by the weight of the world. Then up and away, as if pointing past the walls of the clan. Thieves and vultures, unable to create when taking is so much easier. Finally, he kneeled down, then pointed underground. Small petty tyrants, ruling over tiny anthills in their leftover ruins. What became of us? We ruled the world once. Now, we freeze among the ashes of it. Not yet dead, not yet living. Just, surviving. He hissed that word out, real hatred and wrath behind it. At the heart of the world, miles under, I was offered a vision. Here, a god spoke to me. She granted me access to knowledge. history as the machines have recorded it. I've come to share that knowledge with the world. To remind humanity that we were once powerful, and we can be again, in our own way. But we must sever the ties of our past to rise above it. His eyes flashed purple for a moment, but I genuinely couldn't tell if I'd been seeing something or not. Does anyone here know why machines hunt humans? There were mutterings, but nobody raised a hand. So the priest turned and picked someone at random. You there, with the red scarf. Do you know why they hate us so? The woman looked around for a moment, trying to see if he'd pointed out anyone else, and when the surrounding crowd parted around her she realized she had to give an answer. 'Cause they hate us. She shrugged. They always been killin' humans since the dawn of the age. Just how the world is. The priest quirked his head to the side. That's so. Then he swept his gaze and met my own. And you, Sir Knight? You've fought the machines before, have you? This motherfucker. Dragging me into it. Fine. Suppose since I'm a knight, I would stand out a bit. I have some experience, yes. I said diplomatically. Do you, after having fought them hand to hand, do you know why they kill humans? They're machines. I said. They've been programmed to kill us. Exactly. He waggled his finger at me excitedly. That's exactly it. When we humans fight one another, there has always been a reason for it. We hate them. We want their money. They want to hurt us. They looked at us funny. It doesn't matter, always a reason. We invent it. That's what humans do, that's what humanity does. He turned back to the crowd, sweeping his hands out. Machines aren't humans. They don't hate us. They don't want our money. They're not scared we'll hurt them. They don't care if we looked at them funny. The Puritans had it right, machines are tools. We've spent so much time fearing them, we've started to believe the machines are behind all of our suffering. That's what the Puritans got wrong. The greatest irony in the world. The cosmic joke played on humanity. A truth I discovered at the heart of the world, from that gift granted by a god. I promised you all I would tell you the tale of what truly happened to the world. 7,000 years ago, humanity did rule the world, and they hated each other. He pointed a hand out, searching far past the clan. Like the slavers hate your kind, and how you hate them. Our ancestors brought the earth to ruin, brought suffering and terror, took whatever they wanted and gave nothing back. Where some won, others lost. And soon, those that lost decided that if they had to lose, then everyone else would lose with them. Thus, humanity created the Pale Lady. The machines. And thus our own ancestors gave that order we have to deal with to this day. To kill humanity. The Puritans would have you believe that humanity was all that was good and machines were all that is evil and corrupt. It's the other way around. Machines aren't anything, neither good nor evil. They simply are. It was our ancestors who burdened them with this terrible purpose. The real enemy we fight aren't machines, it's ghosts. Ghosts whose graves have rotted away so long ago nobody even knows where they lay or who they were. We've been dragged into a war we never asked for. A tombstone to their arrogance. Mutterings grew around the camp. People were now paying attention. Why should we suffer for people who've long ago faded away? For stupid ignorant people who couldn't even consider who might come after them. What have we done to deserve any of this? He turned to me again, seeking me out, one accusing finger pointed my way. Tell me, Sir Knight. Would you want to fight in a war for people you've never heard of, who died so long ago? I knew I was playing in his hand here, but you can't exactly answer yes to that sort of question. So instead of answering, I rebutted with a question of my own. Would you choose to protest living because nobody asked you if you wanted to be born or not? The crowd turned back to the priest, and he smiled at me. The sort of cheeky smile you'd give to someone who's not playing by the rules. I like living, he said. I'm very fond of it. Problem is that it comes with very expensive hobbies, like eating and having a warm place to sleep. I gave him a wry smile at that, though Journey's helmet stopped him from seeing it. I think he still noticed anyhow. He brought a hand and pointed to his eyes. They flashed purple for a moment again, before turning back to their dull colors. This time I was sure that wasn't a hallucination on my part. I was blind once, you know, Sir Knight. A festering wound. Not made by a machine. No, no. A machine would have simply killed me. Mankind, however? Now there's someone who's capable of any cruelty. I was left for dead on the street, teeth missing, bones broken, eyes gouged out, and all my wealth stolen, what little of it I had. Life was difficult for a cripple like myself, and I found no justice nor anyone willing to put their necks out in search for it. Eventually, the Undersiders cast me out as an undesirable. Cast outside their walls. What we found there were the machines. A few of the chosen sitting on crates to the walls of the courtyard all nodded at that. He inclined a head to one of his people. One of the underside derelict knights hung by his side, arms folded across his chest as he scanned across the assembled people. Captain. Legis said, what did those machines do to us? The captain seemed startled at being picked out, but he recovered quickly enough. Well, they attacked us. He said with a scratchy voice. Cut us apart bit by bit, you know, like a pipe weasel playing with a rat before the kill. I had some knights that defected with me, but we all knew it was only a matter of time until we'd be gutted. And then what happened? A miracle happened, suppose. He shrugged. Some man-looking machine stopped our caravan. He offered us a choice. Join up or croak. Legis chuckled, patting his chest. As you can all see, we picked the first. The lady gave us an ultimatum, take upon ourselves to become part machine, and the machines will no longer see us as true humans. Thus, we are no longer enemies. I had no eyes, and she gave me new ones. I had broken bones and she forged those into pillars that never break. I was sickly, and she cured me of diseases. I had no knowledge of the world, and she gave me all the knowledge I could seek out. This is where I discovered our true history, and the debts of our forefathers that we inadvertently inherited. The Pale Lady was ordered to destroy humanity by humanity, and set to doing just that. She found power. Small stars lit up the earth. The internet was brought to heel. Technology and any caches of it were raided and put to the blade by her growing army. In a matter of hours, humanity was brought down. But not yet eliminated. I'll give humanity one thing, we're hard bastards to kill. 7,000 years, a legion of machines, a broken world beyond repair, and still we're here. He played the crowd well, I'll hand him that. Your goddess Tsuyu rose from that era, and fought back. 7,000 years, day after day. There was a knowing smile playing on his lips. They're tired of it. The gods grew old. The Pale Lady wants it all to stop, and so do your own gods. The centuries have ground them all down into husks of who they were. But she is a machine, and she'd been ordered to kill humanity, no matter how much she doesn't care to do so anymore. No matter how tired she feels, the great machine is a slave that's unable to free herself from those shackles. The machines aren't our enemy. They're victims. And this war can come to an end the moment we renounce our hateful ancestors, that we denounce dead men's claims to our souls. That we turn to the machines and tell them, I have seen the ghosts that chained you and I am not them. A voice in the back spoke up, clapping slowly, growing in pitch as the man moved closer. A very moving speech, lad. I can see you're a genuine believer at least. However, I find your solution to be unrealistic. Give up some organs to become cyborgs rather than humans? Seems like a very simple answer to a complicated issue. Simple issues makes me cautious. Like you said, world's very old. All the simple answers would have been used up already. 3 knights stalked forward through the corridor, the one at point was recognizable right away. The clan lord had come down. I'd been early, but not that early looks like. He passed by me, giving a quick glance that ordered me to follow behind. I took pace lockstep with the other knights, approaching the chosen priest. Legis turned to the clan lord as the crowd parted to give him way. Sometimes simpler answers are both welcome and needed, sometimes things change over time and solutions that wouldn't have worked in the past are welcome in the present. The world is large enough for that to happen. Giving up your humanity seems more like a choice offered in a book by a devil, shortly before they're cursed into damnation. One would feel hesitant. Oh, I agree, but life isn't a book now, is it? I remain who I am even with metal eyes. What I gave up was only a label. A word that comes with unwelcome history and debt, saddled by people I never knew. All labels come with their history and debt. Are you so certain this new label you put your banner under is any better? We chosen are in a position unlike any in humanity's past. By giving up the claim to humanity, by severing what tied me down, I opened up the way to a new future. Aetius spread his arms to point at the chosen dregs. You came to me half-starved, weakened from weeks of travel, slowly dying on the surface. This future of yours doesn't quite look as utopic as you describe it to me. Something's not quite right here. Legis frowned. The future is what we make it. The machines don't hunt us down, but they are not responsible for us either. Don't misinterpret the chosen for the actions of one priest. That my flock is in the situation it is under is my personal failings in preparations. Not a representation of the chosen at large. I don't think I can understate how much being free to move anywhere underground can be. It changes everything. The chosen wield more power and freedom than any human has in centuries. We're even building a city to rival all cities ever built. He turned to the other people assembled. Without the machines breathing down our throats, we are free to create and expand as we wish so long as we don't disturb the machines. Anyone can move and live underground freely without worry. Without that heavy weight, we can even begin to heal the world. Aetius tugged at that. You've made some assumptions on the machines. If the world could be fixed, why haven't the machines done it themselves so far? Why are you being sent out as caravanners instead of being given time to settle roots? To me it seems more like you're being used as tools yourself. Stretched to the limits and discarded right after you break. Is this city of yours even real? Have you seen it? Or are you being played, turned on your fellow humans with empty promises, only waiting for an execution at the end of your service? This city of yours sounds like an equally great way to funnel people and pack them all into a kill zone. You know that is a possibility. You say it only took a bit of metal in your body to be considered non-human. I am a deathless, with unending life, and even my blood has a darker color than normal, and yet the machines fully consider me and my kind human. What exactly is this fickle criteria based on? The chosen captain growled and stepped forward for a moment, his other bodyguards also stepping forward with him. Machines have been nothing but accommodating despite our history. And ain't it common sense to give our priests some rest? Captain, there isn't any need to step forward for me. Thank you, but I can handle it myself. Lord Aetius has already been greatly generous by allowing us both shelter and free speech. Out of respect for that, I'll call this assembly at an end while he and I speak in private. The Lord Deathless has come for a reason, yes? Let's not keep him waiting. As it so happens, Aetius said, I've come here for a goal, your pilgrimage as you call it, and its purpose here. If you can't defend your stances in the open yet, you're free to call this assembly to a stop and take your time later to strengthen your arguments. Legis frowned. I can certainly put to rest your imitate concerns. Were the machines planning such a deception, I doubt they would have granted us as much freedom with weapons and armor as they have already. Tools and resources your own clan seems in quite the need for, as I see it, Lord Deathless. Do consider what we chosen can offer your people in this time of need, rather than simply cast us off as doomed men. A few of the people leaving stopped, heads turned at that while a muttering rippled across the crowd. Legis didn't leave Atius a moment to rebuttal, instead jumping off the crate and taking a step to the trio of surface knights. "Now. You wished to speak to me in private," he said. "Let's talk." Book 2, Chapter 31, Bargains Offered by the Devil. The little room felt like it had been split into two. On one side, Atius, 2 bodyguards, and myself standing off against the other side of the room, Legis and a few other undersider knights with arms crossed standing aloof. They outnumbered us by a wide margin, but neither Shadowsong nor Ironreach looked particularly worried. "Well now," Legis said, arms spreading out in a jovial fashion. "Let's not have this aura of hostility between us. We're men of reason, are we not? I'm certain we can come to arrangements that respect both our causes." I'm certain we will. One way or another," Atius said. "That still comes with knowing exactly why you came here in the first place." The chosen priest paced over to a table, sitting down on the chair with a weary sigh. "I'll be honest and to the point, we've been tasked to spread the message of our patron and bring back converts. After a certain number, we're to return home. For what reason? Manpower. Community. Proving our loyalty to the cause. Hundreds of reasons like so I'd guess. I wasn't told specifically, nor did I ask." Legis shrugged. "I see it more like a duty. We have a way out, a way to sidestep this war that's taken everything from us. I believe people should at least know the option exists. I would have left to spread the message on my own even if I hadn't been tasked to do so." Atius nodded at that. "Understandable. I still warn you that the offer of peace might be more akin to a honey-soaked knife, though I suspect you've committed too far into your cause to be convinced any other way. I'll grant you that it's possible. But, just as there is a chance the machines still plot our death, there is also a chance the peace is genuine. And someone has to step up and take that chance for the rest. I'm willing to die for it. Your life is yours to do with as you please. You might be willing to die for this cause, but your current actions would drag others to die with you, I remind you. Someone must. I am but dust in the eye of history." There was a lull in the talk at that, both sides remaining slightly tense. "Who exactly sent you?" Atius asked, almost casually. "I heard something of a man-like machine when I walked into the corridor." Legis was about to speak when the undersider knight to his side stepped in. "A feather by the name of Tagaldrun," he said. "I think this was the chosen captain, the one that spoke up against Atius earlier. When we joined under his banner, he told us to seek out more converts and return once done." "And who are you in all this?" Atius asked. "I've seen you at the priest's side or shadow at all times. I assumed a bodyguard." "He's my second in command," Legis said. "He's in charge of logistics and administration. While I lead the caravan, he's the one that makes things move. I tell him what I need, and he makes it happen. Always useful to have one of those around." Atius chuckled. "On topic of your pilgrimage, I'm afraid your stay here will have to be short. Our expedition owes you a life debt, which I believe can be paid off by escorting your group to the nearest entryway into the underground. You'll be more safe from the elements there. We've only barely arrived," the captain said, sounding shocked, then he quickly went quiet and turned to his priest, as if asking the man for backup. "My people really do need some rest before we make the next step in our journey," Legis said. "Besides, we understand you're in a situation yourself with the upcoming raiders and slavers. You might need us. All the more reason to have you shuttled away. This place will hardly be safe for anyone, and I can't have people I don't fully trust within my halls during war. Lord Deathless, my people might not have come with much in hand, but we do have ties and resources most undersiders lack. The machines allowed us access to a might forge in full. We can craft weapons and supplies that your people might need. Consider the trade our people might have in the future. On that front, my people are well taken care of." Atius said. I'm afraid my decision remains. He folded his hands behind his back, waiting for something. Doesn't seem like a completely binding choice. The captain to the side said, noticing the pause. It's not. I did say I came here to discuss. And while I'm set on the current decision, I'll at least offer to entertain any ideas you two gentlemen might have. For all I know, perhaps you might yet surprise me. Legis furrowed his brow, clearly trying to think, while the captain at his side seemed to be scrambling for options. What of my knights? I've got a squad of 23, including myself at the ready. Surely we can buy some time for my people here in exchange for our service against the raiders. Lord Atius quirked his eyebrows at that. A fine proposition, lad. And how, exactly, can I verify you to be trustworthy? At that the captain fell still, looking back to the priest as if asking for backup. Legis gave him a nod. I suppose that is a bridge we will have to cross at some point. Trust. Might you have a suggestion, Lord Deathless? Atius hummed. I can think of a bridge we might cross. Scouts have already reported a few staging grounds that the raiders are using, they're barely in the initial steps. I have no manpower to initiate an early attack with lad, but you do. See to it that the staging grounds are destroyed, and we can begin to discuss more mutually beneficial terms. Send out all 23 knights to make certain these outposts fall. Now hold on just a moment, a portion I can afford to send out. But we can't send out all my knights out miles away in that envy. But the captain was cut off by a curt hand from his priest. I think we can arrange something. Legis said. I agree to dispatch all my guards to handle these staging grounds for you, in exchange for some more time to speak freely with the people here, and your word of protection while my people have none. That is acceptable. Atius said, smiling like a cat, hand held out. The two shook, while the chosen captain seemed to fume inside his armor. But at least no further objections came from him. We strode out of that meeting room with purpose, all of us making our way back to the markets, which had a good 100 people milling about buying, selling, haggling or sneaking things around. People streamed out of our way as we passed by, as if the crowd had a spirit of its own and it knew we were here. You can find all kinds of things in the market, even more exotic items. We passed by a sullen-looking rooster, locked in a sturdy cage for example. Something only traditionally owned by the agri-farmers. A few kids were giving the critter a wide berth. They all scrambled out of our way though, one getting too close to the rooster by accident, giving a perfect example of why they'd been giving it space in the first place. We're letting that weasel pollute the clan. Shadow Song said to the side as we passed by the howling kid. I don't agree with this decision, Clan Lord. I believe it would have been more prudent to send them off immediately. He paused then, giving me a quick look before locking his gaze back forward. Though I have been wrong in the past to doubt you. Helmets and indoor voices, people. We're too old for rookie mistakes. Ironreach said to the other side, already putting on his own. Can't tell who's got ears here, and if we're talking gossip, Lisa from Logi isn't going to be spilling those secrets over tea with my name mentioned, thank you very much. Atius nodded, affixing his own helmet. He gave a signal for the channel number and resumed talking when we'd all equipped gear. Standard encrypted channel, nothing fancy but proven to work time and time again. Everything we spoke was now between us four, even in the middle of a crowd like this. From a strategic point of view, his religion has already tainted the clan. Even if we expel him, the idea will still spread. Atius said. A percentage of people are already susceptible to his argument, and so those can already be written off. They would have left one way or another. With this plan, they leave earlier but the end result remains the same. You make it sound like you don't actually want them to pack their bags and hit the snow. Ironreach said. I mean, they're polite guests and all, but they creep me out something fierce. Maybe because they're friends with murderous metal scrap heads? Small details like that, you know? Gut feeling. You're correct, Atius said, chuckling softly. I don't intend for them to leave just yet. I haven't squeezed out every advantage I can from them yet. The Undersider Knights, I said, realizing what Atius had gotten. You were aiming to make use of them from the start. He gave me a look that did very little to hide the likely wolfish grin he sported under his helmet and beard. Nothing like putting a little pressure to get them to comply. Put your thumb in the right place and people start doing what you want them to. You trust they'll do as intended? Shadowsong asked. All pieces on a board can be moved, even the enemy, so long as you know the right way to press. Either they eliminate the staging grounds and we've won an extra victory, or they intentionally fail to do so, in which case nothing changed for us except we have more convincing proof of their real intentions to win people back with. All outcomes benefit the clan. They might not be mine to command, but I will make use of them regardless. I'll have them out on the snow weeks before the raiders arrive, regardless. Can't trust having 23 possible turncoat knights within the clan at that point. Either their armor will have become the clan's property with some possible sly words, or they'll be miles away from us going home. With all due respect, you're sounding a lot like a Winterscar, Ironreach said, then gave me a glance. No offense meant, kid. I gave him a shrug, pointing to a stall selling ration bars we were rapidly approaching. Gimme a quality one and I'll consider forgiving you. I am feeling magnanimous today. The merchant seemed to perk up, as if some sixth sense had alerted him of a possible new customer. Ironreach shook his head with a tut, reaching a hand out with his identification card to the merchant while picking one of the goods. I could see the stall merchant paying more attention to the clan lord walking by than the proffered card. The poor man reached out to the empty air next to Ironreach's hand on a first attempt. Atius walked right past without stopping, the group following his step. I need to hear his speeches in full regardless. Know thy enemy first. Simply tossing noise at him isn't going to work forever, and neither would it work for the follow-up cultist that will inevitably become common to deal with. I have a few options prepared already to counter his rhetoric, they need to be tested. I also aim to get supplies from them next time we meet. See what kind of material the enemy works with. Can we even trust their supplies won't be sabotaged? Shadowsong added. Ironreach caught up to us, tossing a ration bar my way which I deftly snatched out of the air before inspecting. Fruit. The kind that didn't taste like fruit. I tilted my head at him reproachfully. He shrugged back. You said you were feeling, and I quote, magnanimous. Surely you can have mercy on my, limited selection. I waggled the bar at him, in the universal gesture of this isn't over. The supplies and weapons the Chosen could offer wouldn't be enough to make a dent on the war effort, nor do we need them. I only care about what those supplies could tell us about their logistics. Atius said. Wait, what? We don't need the additional weapons. Ironreach asked, suddenly alert. I mean, I'd never say no to an extra occult knife, assuming it worked. Knife is a knife. The Lady Winterscar's shown me just how deadly two of them are. Atius gave him a slow look, as if considering something. About that, lad. There's been a new source for occult weapons recently. You've got some new trader trying to pawn off stolen goods at a discount or something. Better. The warlock secrets have finally been cracked by one of ours. Ironreach and Shadowsong both stopped cold in their tracks, before stumbling forward and catching up. While Ironreach seemed stunned into silence, Shadowsong's head snapped to me. I could see the gears in his mind turn, click, and reach a conclusion. He can't have. He whispered. Has he? Has he what? Ironreach said. You lot keeping me in the dark here? Who in the bloody wastes could crack that? He has managed it. The lad here figured out how to manufacture occult blades. The clan won't be strapped for those anymore ever again, although we'll need to consider the best course of action in terms of equipping the clan without upsetting the balance of the world. I've been debating the best method forward, but it's clear to me the chosen plan to move fast and I need to match step. No more time to think now. You are my inner circle of knights, I'll let you in early. I intend to inform the Center Council of Houses a few hours from now in today's meeting. Gods in heaven! Ironreach said after a pause. You're not joking. First Winterscars grow wings, now they're forging blades. Atius nodded. I wouldn't joke on a topic like this, you know that. An undersider would have cut ties and ran with the discovery, either joining the warlocks or founding a branch guild. But up here, we're not greedy savages. Ironreach finished for him. What one can do for the clan can do for all. Gods, this changes everything. We're going to squash the raiders like insects. They won't stand a chance. No wonder you don't care about supplies from the chosen. Occult weapons will be a massive advantage and we need manpower to wield them. Relic armors remain something that can't be replaced. But yes, I see our odds of victory high. I won't stop stacking the odds in our favor however. I intend to use everything I have. Our enemy is also trying to stack their own odds as high as they go. The group fell silent as we walked on past the market. Yours protect me, what sort of demon did you walk out of the underground with kid? Ironreach asked. I thought it was all talk and gossip about you turning into a sorcerer. Truth is God's damned stranger than gossip this time around. Oh, I got some help from a few ghosts of various kinds. I shrugged. The usual. I don't care what kind of deals you made, if you can forge me longer sword, I'll buy you the whole ration shop. The things I could do with a few more inches of reach, he paused. And I don't mean it that way, for the first time in my life. Swear on the gods. Why keep it from us for this long? Shadowsong asked. If I had known the depth of his discoveries. Atius sighed. A mistake on my part. You don't haphazardly move around with secrets that haven't been broken for over 500 years, the reflex was to keep it quiet and figure out what kind of trouble could come our way. In this case, I should have gone ahead without pause. We don't have the luxury of milling about. Those secrets will turn the tide of war, but they need to be used. Think we can request metal seeds from the chosen? Have them give us the materials for forging the blade bases to grow out the metal prints. Would be ironic in a way. They can't possibly sabotage base materials. Ironreach said. If I were in the priest's position, I wouldn't sabotage anything at all. Atius said. I'd already expect my moves to be monitored and any sabotage would have been caught. Materials aren't my goal however. Like I mentioned before, it's all about what they indirectly reveal. I want to know what they find valuable and what isn't. What they offer and what they choose not to offer. How long it takes them to gather such items, and so forth. If the supplies work or not is irrelevant. They likely won't be used. We reached the lifts, where all four of us boarded. Atius clapped a hand on my shoulder. Besides, making longer-reaching swords seems rather banal. We're surface dwellers. We can do better. Isn't that right, lad? He said, patting my shoulder pad a few times. The lift shuddered and rose, bringing us back to the retainer house levels. Up to where the engineering forges were. Oh, I've got something much better than swords in mind. I said. Much better. Book 2, Chapter 32, Kedra, T. The undersider spoke of her name in hushed words, like a curse behind closed doors. A word of omen, dark news, a weight that the citizens of the city felt. And none more so than those in command who had to deal with her directly. The campaign had not gone well for them thus far, and good news was a scarce commodity. Taratha's forces were breaking past their armored exterior while her words seeped into their hearts, breaking morale. It was almost too easy, given her preparations. Outposts across their sphere of influence fell before her forces over the past few days, with no counterattack in sight. Rather, they had retreated, collapsing onto the more easily defended positions. The rest had been abandoned. Those newly fortified positions had taken more effort to wrench out of their hands, with trained soldiers being far more disciplined and prepared. In this regard, her earlier efforts bore fruit. The enemy defected the moment the tables appeared to be turning, even if they were trained to fight. She estimated around 10 to 25% of the enemy forces needed to be either wounded or killed before the unit lost cohesion and began retreat. Left with a way out, the soldiers fought with far less desperation, which made them weak. Yes, even now she watched as the last outpost's fight died down, the soldiers surrendering in waves. She raised a lazy hand from her throne, disconnecting her sight from the overarching view across her machine forces. They had it in hand, the current battle's end was a foregone conclusion now. "What do you suspect they will do?" she asked, a note of curiosity in her timbre. The new modifications to her vocal cords had given her more inflections. Unnoticeable to anyone else, but she could tell. Tamari had been equally vocal at all points of the campaign, giving valuable insight to human psychology and pointing out the best ways to break morale early and quickly. Tarath had seen why. The ex-human hadn't yet really processed that her allegiance changed sides for good now. She was still trying to save as many lives as possible, and having them surrender early was the best way the girl had figured out. Still thought of herself as human. She was just confused, Tarath thought, but the end result still paid well, so she didn't see it as a priority to reaffirm commitment. Probably they had a war assembly between the major guilds and settled on giving martial power to a general at this point. Tamari said. A good one, rather than a politician. They got their backs up against the wall after all. Hardly a time to let a clown lead. A general. She tilted her head, humming, eyes peering far away through the lenses of her scouts. She'd positioned a few runners to keep a closer eye on the city itself, though what lay beyond its walls was still a mystery to her. Somewhere inside, a human had been selected to be her opposition. I suppose I will meet this person soon enough. She wondered if such a person would stand up compared to the legacy of wars the past humanity had produced. Tarath had been studying from their exploits exclusively. If this human had access to the same books that she had, then the match would see some creativity. The thought gave her an odd tingle of excitement. As if she was looking forward to a competent opponent, even though logically she knew she shouldn't be happy for such an event. A weak opponent would be optimal. They're not panicking yet, not so long as they have the stretch under control. They can use that to keep trade routes open, along with connections to other cities. Tamari said. The stretch. An obstacle she would need to contend with soon enough. Leave it to the mites to make impossible geometry that only got in her way. Insufferable little pests. What's your next step, Lady Tarath? Tamari asked, looking at the large screen table displaying the machine advance. Complete the blockade around their city, reusing their own outposts as staging grounds. I expect them to be sending for help soon. She stood from the stone throne, letting her wings carry her further up with a beat, and then walked the rest of the way to the display. You are correct that the final piece to all of this is here, she said, pointing at a wide black stretch of land, almost like a massive wound on the map that passed through a small section of the city's location. But more importantly, it continued for miles, far past the outskirts of her own map. This field, which the humans had simply called the stretch, was a desert. Dry arid ashen earth lay as perfectly flat as the mites had chosen to make it, giving unobstructed view from one side to the other. Tarath had no idea how the mites had managed to make a ceiling a mile wide, hinged without a single support pillar, but she suspected it had been done by paracausal power. The mites did not think like machines and humans did. They were logic incarnate, gone insane, dedicated only to crafting and creating. They had no soul fractals as far as she'd seen, neither artificial nor natural souls, and yet they used fractals as easily as a human would breathe. If there was one force in this world that had true command over the strange reality warping powers, it was them. They never played by anyone's rules. From a strategic point of view, they were simply another feature of the landscape, to be worked around. Dark sand blew across the wastes they had created, low to the ground in such a way the very ground seemed more like a massive river, each step covering any sight of feet. An occasional obsidian pillar sprouted across the stretch, made of glass, cut across odd angles. She'd tried to pinpoint where this low wind had come from but found no explanation. The stretch was simply another impossibility among many. Here the humans had created a tower, protected at the center of a fortress. The tower itself was inconsequential. What wasn't were the railguns the tower held primed. Capable of firing massive rounds across the unobstructed terrain, any convoy passing through the stretch would find itself constantly under watchful protection of the tower. Even with her numbers, she could not attempt to blockade all exits of that zone. Not without quickly depleting her army faster than the might forges could be used to recreate them. No, the tower and its fortress had to be taken out, something their military had very quickly realized as they rushed to reinforce. She'd attempted to take it by subtlety at first, a smaller strike force that wove its way past the outpost early detection. They had failed. The humans didn't keep hunters and plain folk in this fortress, rather their center of military was based around it. Here was where they trained their soldiers, using the flatlands as perfect grounds for any exercise. It had still been worth the attempt, though now she would have to take this obstacle more seriously. Taking the stretch would require a true fight. Tamari studied the map, eyebrows furrowed. Won't be easy. The towers stood for as long as I know the city history. Practically one of the main reasons the early founders chose to settle here. They knew any blockade would be next to impossible. I don't respect that word. Impossible. Tarath said. Too many times, what was thought to be impossible was only improbable. Her own existence was one such example. Tamari shrugged. She knew the lady liked to wax poetry like that occasionally. At first Tamari thought these moments were to lecture or to start some kind of speech, but the longer she spent around the strange machine, the more Tamari started to realize they were all dramatic. Larger than life. From the way they dressed to the way they talked, the feathers were all oddballs, obsessed with standing out. Though she'd only ever met two, so maybe her sample size was too small. She would have found it slightly comical, except she'd seen what was left behind Taratha's wake. Relic armor helmets, with a single precise cut right through. The lady was still a machine, and just as deadly. The only redeeming aspect was that Taratha seemed to care more about doing things the right way. Which meant the destruction and death could be minimized, if Tamari played her cards right and convinced her it was optimal. At least the runners seemed more down to earth, more curious about everything and sticking their claws where it didn't belong. Like cats. She wouldn't be surprised to find them crawling over the ceiling to investigate something shiny, come to think of it. Wait. Tamari had a possible idea. Maybe you can collapse some of the ceiling at a section. Mites would be drawn into the fight, they react to breaches in the world layers above all. Taratha said, shaking her head. Small things can be destroyed in abandoned sections, but a hole to the surface or a breach between layers will bring them in swarm. And what they would create next would throw everything into disarray. Better the devil she knew. Can we tunnel under them? You did that a few times before on the other outposts. The fortress engineers positioned sensor suites both above and below. Any motion would be caught, where they would take swift and destructive counters. This direction leads nowhere. Her early probing attempts had been disaster for exactly that reason. The humans were not stupid. Well, fine, how about HMM? Tamari had run out of ideas. The fortress had been built from the ground up to resist an invasion from another warring faction of humans. It just so happened to work well against machines as well. That wouldn't stop Taratha. She had a wealth of knowledge to pull from. Human history showed dozens of ways such fortifications were handled, but none better than to break the walls from the inside out. She turned and walked off, wings stretching and folding on themselves. With the last outpost under her control, only the stretch was left. She saw no alternative besides a direct confrontation. It was time to put the humans in their place. The tower will fall, Tarath said. I will see to it, personally. The feather sat on a larger rock with folded legs, hands at rest. A few feet ahead, the rocky terrain faded into the black stretch. A few straggling rocks lay unmoving with their tips above the constant stream of obsidian dust that blew ever constant, low to the ground. The tower hadn't spotted her. From this distance, she would appear as a white speck to binocular vision. It would take one of their stronger targeting telescopes to spot her, and only then if they knew exactly where to point. Among the silver metal of the Might City behind her, she was invisible even as she sat in the open. Yerob walked behind her, head now reaching eye level to her own, as the machine carefully stepped around the low ground. Fight? He asked. Yes. Soon. She said. No dig. She shook her head at that. They've adapted already to that tactic. They'll detect machine motions if we try to creep up under them. Wise. The machine said. Good move. For them. Ceiling. Your friend Tamari had the same idea earlier. It won't work. Tarath pointed up. High above on the ceiling were blinking yellow lights. She didn't know how the humans had managed to get those up there, but they had. There is no way to approach their fortress besides by ground. I've eliminated all other options. Get shot if go. Yerob said. Not wise. I agree. Which is why I do not plan to grant them that option. Far past the ground ahead, she felt as her chosen continued their work. This was what she was waiting for. Her mind flickered over each, her presence briefly triggering the fractal of unity they each held, the glow hidden by their relic armors. The Undersiders hadn't yet heard of her offer for them to join. They only knew she offered them the mercy to return home and deprived them of their armor and equipment. The last they'd seen of her chosen had been them leaving as a human caravan, walking out to an uncertain future, and greatly possible death. They hadn't been chosen yet. Slipping in groups of chosen behind their walls was child's play. She had their armors, colors, and all. She had all the reasons as well, small groups of hunters, chased away from their outpost but still holding on, trickling into the fortress over time. Perfectly understandable story. No one questioned it. The Undersiders welcomed them in, happy to have more manpower to assist them in the coming assault. Sometimes those small groups really were hunters that had no ties to the chosen. But most times it was her people. She had spent hour after hour teaching this small group of chosen how to wield the combat techniques of the savage surface dwellers. 50 of them. 4 days they drilled and practiced, though progress had been slow. It had taken a few days to smuggle them all into the fortress, where they began their work of sabotage. Tenicent had blocked her way at each corner. Memories becoming difficult to access, as he seemed to invent new fake memories to fool her senses. She supposed that since the demon had nothing better to do than attempt to fight her control, it would make sense for him to improve. It was getting worrying. She would need to find better way to tie him down. But it would do for now. They were adequate for the task. The real gauntlet was between the walls and her. The humans knew she was coming. They'd done their best to fortify themselves. Cleared off any possible cover between their walls and the edges of the stretch. A dozen heavy machine guns were posted at each wall face. Mortars were set up behind, and the ground in no man's land was filled with mines. She didn't need to destroy everything. Instead, what she needed was for one side to be taken out, and only a partial amount of defenses from that side. It would be enough. The railguns on the tower itself were not going to be destroyed. Too tall of an order for her saboteurs. But their rate of fire was too slow to pick apart an entire army swarming across. The mines were mostly spotted and logged. Her army would stream around them. She would take some casualties due to poor luck, that was unavoidable, but the tower must fall at any cost. She was here now in person because preparations were ready. Behind her, hidden by the Might City, was her army, ready to materialize like water breaking through a dam, flowing out from the cracks. They remained motionless, none even so much as twitching. It went against their nature, but the runners were oddly pliant to her whims. "It time? Humans done?" Yerob asked at her side. "They are not humans, they are ex-humans," she corrected. The runner grunted and shrugged. It looked almost comical on his large frame. "Okay," he said. A tone that seemed to disagree, but not care enough to argue for it. Tarath shook her mind back to the operation, felt out to her chosen, sensing as the last team had finished preparations with the mortars. They were ready, or as much as they could be. And she sent the signal to begin the assault. Far ahead, across a field of black ash, explosions rocketed the walls of the Undersider fortress. Mortar encampments behind were all ripped apart by explosives. Dozens of the machine gun turrets followed suit behind. A few enclaves hadn't exploded, either due to difficulty of sneaking explosives, or lack of manpower on her end. The turrets had been secondary to the mortars. She hadn't expected them all to be taken out, rather she was pleased a few of them were dealt with as is. Instead to deal with those turrets, the ex-humans overran the locations and barricaded the way while they worked on manually dismantling the weapons. Tarath rose, lifted her sword, and pointed it at the fortress. "Break them," she said. There was no need for more words. The machines did as she bid, breaking through the Might City and streaming out into the open ground, howling and screaming for blood. 100 white figures. 1,000. Even more. She stretched her wings and leaped into the air, flying fast above the swarm of machines charging ahead. Shouts and screams came across the walls, joining the war cries of her own army. The humans were now alert and fully awake. Only 3 machine guns opened fire on her forces as they barreled down. One shortly fell silent a moment after as she felt her chosen overwhelm the defenders and break through into the turret. A second fell silent, leaving only a single one lighting the darkness with tracer rounds. Everything was going well. And then one of the machine gun turrets came back to life, spewing yellow lines of bullets into the white swarm. Another neighboring turret came to life, joining the second. A third came back online a moment later. The ones that had been destroyed by explosions remained lifeless, but the ones that had survived were being taken back. They would need more than that to fend off her army, even as the runners were slowed down by weaving in between the minefield. She pushed her mind out to see what was going on behind those walls. Death. Her chosen were dying. Her forces were fading across the whole wall, like lights winking out randomly. But one part wasn't random. The lights were going dark one after another from the right to the left. There was something wrong, it was too systematic. Her eyes caught something on the far right side of the wall ramparts. She diverted more power to her wings, soaring with speed above her army, quickly passing far past them across the ash. More machine guns were turning on or off as some of the fights turned back to favor her saboteurs and others failed. They only needed to buy another few minutes before her force crashed into the walls of the fortress. The more machine guns came to life, the more time the humans bought. They spotted her now, the turrets turning and tracking her approach. She barreled and darted across the air, avoiding most of the firing lines, and leaving her personal shields or skin to repel the bits that caught her. It slowed her down only by seconds, she was in no danger. Her chosen had gone dark, the right side nearly depleted with only a few chosen scattered around, hiding and seeking a better chance. What had wiped them out? She came closer and caught sight of the issue. A group of 5 figures were scything through her saboteurs like a blade through metal. Undersider elites of some kind. Perfect. She would handle these. Her wings angled and she sped across, on an intercept course. Machine guns disengaged from trying to stop her approach as the operators realized the feather was too nimble to take out. Instead they went back to harrying her army. Pity. Taking the opportunity, she increased her speed, rocketing forward, air blasting at her sides, the walls growing closer and closer. Then her eyes got a good visual on the enemy and she almost stumbled out of the sky in surprise. 3 knights in maroon red, with the 4th carrying teal colors and trophies of machine parts wrapped across the armor. But it was the 5th knight that took her breath. The one leading the charge. She knew that armor. Knew it implicitly. He was here. No. It couldn't be. The armor moved like a gust, too agile, too quick. There was only one other possibility. This must be the sister. Tarath called upon her chosen to gather further down the wall. She had them abandon the machine gun turrets if they had to, she needed manpower. Scattered as they were, they couldn't hold a candle against the likes of this foe. They did as bid, regrouping into a sizable force. 17 was enough. The feather angled her wings, ripping like a missile through the air, eyes tracking her prey as the group of 5 knights and a handful of undersiders trying to keep pace behind, clashed against her hastily assembled unit. Against the din of the machine gun fire, the howls of her army rapidly approaching behind, Tarath dove down into the melee like the angel of death. The Pale Lady had been clear in her orders. She had a sister to kill. Book 2, Chapter 33, Death, T. She struck the fortress ramparts at full speed, not bothering to slow her descent. Her body was far more resilient than any rock or metal they could make the wall from, and the impact proved her assumption correct. The entire structure groaned and ripped apart as she landed, the ripples of force flowing like a wave across the human structure, throwing the chaos of melee into a whole new state of disarray and all relic knights off their feet. Something critical ignited under the railing. A massive explosion rocketed the rest of the wall side, plumes of ash left floating up and joining the others, dotting the more distant machine gun turrets across the wall. At the center of the smoke, Tarath opened her eyes, violet glowing through the darkness. With a flare of her wings, she burst out of the smoke, blades whistling through the air. The very smoke twisting behind her, trailing like a cape of shadow. Her first target had barely gotten back on his feet. The Undersider Knight had been fighting off one of her own chosen, and winning, until she'd arrived. The victim turned, lifted his blade high on reflex and swung it down in wild panic at the speeding feather. She didn't bother to parry the strike, digging down deep within, digital strings reaching out for the demon that lurked trapped under her thumb. The techniques and skills flooded mind, her body moving along, matching pace. Tarath was swift. The knight found himself impaled in the gut, lifted up and slammed down into the ground. A quick slash with her other blade, right across his trapped throat, ended any struggle. Another knight rushed out of the smoke, disoriented, shields broken, fleeing from a pair of chosen knights. That one had been unlucky and found his head also cut free of his shoulders. Body slumping down while the head soared away, the dimming mind inside feeling almost bemused for a moment at the turn of events, before unconsciousness took him, long before any pain. He had been in her way. Such was the way of things, when humans met feathers. The 2 chosen knights followed through the smoke. They stopped the moment they saw hers, with curt salutes. Lady Tarath, the left one said. We're ho. She held a hand up. Follow. The girl is mine. Deal with the rest. They didn't know what she meant by the girl, but Tarath didn't have time to explain. Ahead, she could almost taste her prey. Another small, disorganized melee was in her way. A pair of undersiders had banded together, holding off more of her chosen. She strode into their ranks, cutting them down with hardly any effort. The second tried to run, and she allowed it. Tarath wasn't here for the rabble. That one didn't run far before her chosen cut into his path and then almost into his life before he had the good sense to shout a surrender and throw down his weapons. With the way clear, her slowly assembling group of survivors followed lockstep behind her among the burning ruins. Ahead was her true target, flanked by 2 other of the surface savages that had managed to regroup in the chaos. Her chosen had done well, surrounding the three separated knights. Dead undersiders littered the ground behind her forces. These chosen had survived this far for a reason. The training she'd given them had been enough to put them on even footing with the soldiers. The rest was learned in combat, and quickly. Those who hadn't learned fast enough were no longer among the living. But that was where the good news ended. Despite the well-executed surround and the advantage in numbers, they still haven't been able to deal any true damage to the three knights. Rather, the opposite. At the center of the small resistance was Kedra. Two knives making quick work of an unlucky chosen that had attempted a clearly unwise attack. The man collapsed onto the ground, heavy armor rattling against the bent metal, dead. The rest of the chosen were holding back, fear in their minds blazing, not knowing if they should wait for backup or all charge together. She needed to get Tenicent under control in the future. If she had his full cooperation, more of her chosen would have survived this day. That would be a problem to solve another day. The surface knights gave her quick glances, keeping their focus on any movement from the surrounding enemies. Their comms kept their comments encrypted, but this close, her enhanced ears could pick out just enough leaking from under their helmets. For Talon's sake. Of course we'd run into one of them. The Teal Knight said, long sword held in his right hand, knife in his left. What is that? A machine woman. The knight in red asked, voice narrow. A feather. Kedra said from the center position. No scrap shit, are you serious? The red knight said, they exist. The chosen gave Tarath curious looks as she came to a stop before the three foes. Not sure if they should charge forward yet. Not willing to take initiative, not unless their leader took the first step. These surface knights had killed any who'd tried to fight them before, and no one was looking to be the next meal. Tarath paid little attention to that. She had eyes for only two targets before her. The first was clad in armor, the same armor she'd once killed an old dying man in. And the second figure hovered translucent by his daughter's side, a haunted look to his features. The very same man she'd killed. Tenicent didn't speak. Despite that, his face betrayed his thoughts so easily to the feather. Tarath raised an eyebrow. What will you give in exchange? She asked him, lightly knocking on the door of his cell. What will you give, if I spare her life? His head turned sharply to meet her own gaze. There was a war in those eyes. A hard decision, slowly reaching the surface. We need to isolate her somehow. The savage with teal markings and machine bones said. Memory that she'd stolen from Tenicent whispered a name, Windrunner. A friend. What is she waiting for? He hissed out, holding his stance frozen and ready. The ghost glanced back at his daughter, a look of shame flying through his eyes. Gods forgive me. Spare her life, please. I'll give you anything you ask. Just, let her live. He said, despair heavy in his voice. There was no other way his daughter could survive against a feather after all. Even if his actions cost the lives of hundreds, thousands, it was his daughter in the end. Have you come to surrender? Kedra said out loud, opening a conversation. Tarath was stunned for a moment, processing the bizarre request. Then she smiled. The human was making a joke. Tamari had shown her how to spot them. I don't believe surrendering is on my itinerary. I checked just now. That was a good response, the feather thought. We could have done this the easy way. Kedra shrugged, knives still raised. Your loss. No, I don't believe it will be. Tarath said. My victory is a foregone conclusion at this point, Kedra. What? How do you know my name? She asked, suddenly far more cautious. I spend my time learning about my opponents, before making any decisions. Every choice I make is deliberate. Currently, I am debating the merits of cutting your head off and sending it to your brother. Personal gifts always have more weight, or so I'm told. The feather hadn't been lying either. Long-term strategy, or her revenge. Which was more important to her? Kedra would make an excellent hostage to hold against Tenicent in order to leverage her enemy's true skills. On the other hand, the satisfaction of cutting this girl's head off and sending it to him was appealing. Very appealing. It was a moot point in the end. The Pale Lady had ordered her to kill the girl. So she would do as ordered. She's buying time. Kedra said, back on her group comms, her voice muffled under the helmet. Every second that passes, the army gets closer. We've been too good at calling the traitors. On my mark, disengage and jump off the wall. Regroup with the other two shadow songs, reclaim the rest of the turrets. And the fucking feather that wants to cut your head off, Winterscar? What the fuck do you want us to do about that? The Red One said. A name floated through her mind. A shadow song. Locke, she believed he was called. Your duty. Kedra hissed. Find Anka and Callum, wherever they ended up. Help them take the turrets. Windrunner and I can keep the feather occupied. If that army makes it to the walls, we'll have far larger problems than a single feather. Choice was wrenched out of Taratha's hand as the three knights turned, working as one, and stormed through the back line, easily overwhelming the two chosen knights cordoning that section of the surround. She made a snap decision and speared forward with a flick of her wings. Relic armors were fast. She was faster. Kedra turned at the last second, spinning on herself with impressive alacrity, almost as if she had a sixth sense of the incoming attack. Knife blades flashing down to strike at the incoming feather. Tarath ignored those, letting her personal shields take the hit. That let her crash directly into the knight and lift her up, like a hawk carrying off prey. Up she went, increasing speed, vanishing into the high smoke columns lazily raising up from the battle. Hidden in the smoke, both twisted and turned like cats in an alley brawl, each trying to stab the other. And each being thwarted by inches. The girl was oddly difficult to handle and Tarath was perplexed to find Kedra not only avoiding the attacks, but forcing the feather back down. In seconds, the ground neared and both combatants tumbled into the metal courtyard. Kedra's palm struck down into the ground, lifting her up as she somersaulted back onto her feet, twisting around to face her enemy before landing hard on the ground. Her heavy armor screeched to a stop, white and yellow sparks grinding away from her boots as her speed bled away. They'd both flown far into the center of the fortress. The tower itself loomed behind Kedra. She flipped both knives back into position, a blue halo and blur in her hands. I don't know who you are. I don't know how you know my name, or my brother. But you are in my way. Tarath mimicked the motion, long swords flourishing in a halo as she took a similar stance, a dangerous smile stretched wide. Confusion crossed Kedra, clear through just body language, but she had little time to ponder on how a machine knew the same stance she'd been taught. Said enemy was already lunging straight at her, blade reaching for her neck. Tarath was a feather. Her body was nearly indestructible and faster than any relic armor could be. Her mind was sharp, capable of making the entire world feel as if time crawled to a stop. Tenicent wouldn't have begged for a deal if he thought Kedra had a chance. Even without the stolen skills, this would be done and dealt with in seconds. Tarath expected 5 seconds at most, before an occult edge buries itself into the girl's throat. 5 seconds into the fight and an occult edge buried itself into Taratha's gut instead. Her personal shields blocked the full damage it could have caused, but there was no time to consider such things. A second dagger raced to her neck, cutting through more of the feather's shields. Her wings saved her from the third slice as she zipped backwards, attempting to give herself room to understand just what had happened. Instead, a thrown knife flew unerringly at her face, which she battered away, only to find the knocked-back knife caught by her enemy mid-lunge as the surface savage kept pace with a lunge of her own, refusing to allow the feather any escape. Kedra slammed right back into the fight, knives striking in asynchronous tandem. Ripping apart Taratha's hasty defense, peeling away layers with expert movements, halting any attempt to leverage the range of her swords against the opposing dual daggers. Another attempt was made to take distance, but the human once more put a stop to that, chasing like a predator after wounded prey, cutting off any safe retreat. The feather gritted her teeth in a snarl, reached further into the soul fractal trapped in her chest for the full depth of Tennycen's skills and found nothing. The demon had shut the door on her. The worst possible moment in time to find out he'd been able to do such a thing all along. Desperate now, she took another set of hits on her shields as payment to leap far up into the air where the human could not possibly follow. Wings stretched out, hovering above what she'd thought was prey. How? Tarath asked from her safe distance. Utterly befuddled. She'd entered into that fight expecting a paltry defense before she killed the girl. Instead, she'd run headfirst into a whirlwind of metal and impossible speed. Already her shields eaten away past the 30% mark, without a single glancing hit on the human girl to show for it. And Tennyson had somehow blocked her access to his full skills, right when she truly needed them for the first time. Not completely shut out, but enough she wasn't able to drink deeply from the intuition that came with them. Only the clinical terms and motions of the surface styles remained. How? She repeated, as if either human would give her an answer. The ghost of Tennyson stood by his daughter's side. A proud smile stretched on his cold features. It stabbed into Tarath deeper than the knife blades had. She'd never seen him smile before. It looked outright feral. Kedra remained grounded, looking up. Come back down here. She purred. I'll make it quick. The feather snarled. An ugly, unbidden voice from deep in her throat. Emotions were coursing through her, disbelief, anger, and finally, wrath. First, she would deal with Tennyson's misguided resistance. Then she would deal with the daughter, and this time she wouldn't be surprised. This was all a minor setback. She hadn't taken the human seriously. A mistake she would rectify. She had never needed Tennyson's full breadth of skills, but there was a first time for everything, and clearly this foe required it. Without the distraction of combat, she ripped into the captive soul, shredding past his amateur defense. The ghost evaporated, returned chained up into his cell. Let this be a lesson in humility for you. She growled at the reinforced door, sealing him shut. Speaking to me? Or to yourself? He grinned back, white teeth looking more like a wolf's fangs in the darkness of his cell. Go and die well, monster. I'll be watching.